Alors, j'y vais. Bonjour. D'abord et avant tout, on tient à vous présenter nos excuses. La technologie, c'est quelque chose d'autre. Ça peut aller très bien, tout comme ça peut vous donner un peu de difficultés, un peu de maux de tête avant de vraiment commencer. Alors, je commence par me présenter. Mon nom est Marie-Claude Manga. Je suis membre de Femmes de diverses origines. Leila et moi avons le plaisir de vous conduire à travers ces webinaires. Leila.
Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay, technical problems. As usual in Zoom meetings, it happens. Marie-Claude and I will drive you through the day, through this day of women of diverse origins. Vas-y, Marie-Claude.
Le thème retenu cette année est « Femmes en lutte au-delà de la pandémie ». La solidarité active pour le changement. Et notre célébration de cette année, la célébration de la femme, la journée de la femme, est dédiée à deux grandes dames, Lee Maracle et Bell Hooks. Lee Maracle, née en 1950 et décédée en 2021, est une conteuse autochtone, pionnière, force d'énergie. Écoutons ce qu'elle a déclaré. Jusqu'à ce que nous soyons tous libres, les quelques personnes qui pensent l'être restent entachées d'esclavage. Et voici ce que Bell Hooks a déclaré. Bell Hooks, née en 1952 et décédée en 2021. Voici ce qu'elle dit. L'amour est une action, pas seulement un sentiment.
So the theme of this year of our Women's Day is Women's Struggle Beyond the Pandemic, Active Solidarity for Change. And we are dedicating this day to Lee Maracle and Bell Hooks. Lee Maracle says she is an indigenous storyteller, trailblazer, and force of energy. She says, until all of us are free, the few who think they are remain tainted with enslavement. And Bell Hooks, she says, love is an action, not just a feeling.
Alors, avant de commencer, voici quelques règles de base, ou du moins indications de base. La traduction est disponible en français et en anglais. Vous allez au bas de votre écran, vous avez les globes, vous cliquez là-dessus et vous allez choisir la langue de votre choix, en français ou en anglais. Alors, après chaque panel, il y aura une courte période de questions. Alors, nous vous recommandons vivement d'écrire vos questions dans la boîte de discussion. Donc, vous connaissez la boîte de discussion, vous allez là-bas, vous écrivez votre question, mais nous aimerions vraiment que ça soit une question brève pour mieux vous la cerner et puis mieux vous répondre aussi. Alors, on vous recommande aussi vivement de fermer vos micros si vous ne parlez pas, si vous n'êtes pas invité à parler. Alors, en dernier lieu, nous voulons vous informer que la manifestation qui était prévue pour demain dimanche a été repoussée pour des raisons de l'alerte météo. Je vous ai tous là.
Yes, so some ground rules before we begin, so that you know how to manage the day. The translation is available in English and French. At the bottom of your page, you can see the bottom of translation. You can activate it in English or French. And following each panel, we will have a period of question and answer. Please write your questions in the chat box and keep it brief so that we can manage the period effectively. Keep your mics off when you're not talking, so not to interrupt the speakers of the day. And we have to inform you that because of the weather warning, we had to change the date of our rally to next week, next Saturday at 2 o'clock at Park Metro. So please inform everyone around you that the date has changed so that they can join us next week.
Merci. Alors, ceci dit, au nom des femmes de diverses origines, j'ai le plaisir et l'honneur de vous souhaiter la bienvenue. Cette fête, cette célébration nous appartient. Non seulement aux femmes, mais à tous les hommes qui nous accompagnent, qui comprennent la valeur de cette journée. Alors, je vous souhaite tous et toutes la bienvenue. Avant cela, avant de commencer, je vais demander à Leila de faire la reconnaissance du territoire.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. So we acknowledge that we are on traditional unceded indigenous lands with the Kanyankahaka Mohawk Nation recognized as the custodians of the lands. Jojaga or Montreal was historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. Sorry if I pronounce not correctly. We support the ongoing struggles of the First Nations, the original inhabitants of Turtle Island, who have suffered disposition of land and destruction of culture and way of life, including more egalitarian gender traditions as a result of settler colonialism. While many of us struggle and live in precarious situations, we acknowledge that the original inhabitants of these lands continue to also live precariously as a result of the ravages of settler colonialism, and that our struggles for justice should never be at the expense of indigenous peoples of these lands.
Avant de commencer, je nous invite à observer une minute de silence. Une minute de silence en mémoire des victimes de guerre à travers le monde et de façon plus spécifique, des victimes de guerre dans un coin très loin de nous, mais très proche de nous aussi. J'ai cité le peuple ukrainien. Observons une minute de silence. Merci à tous et à toutes.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. So before I pass the mic to Gladys, I'm going to just tell you how the day will be in basic lines. So we will start with some comments from Gladys, a member of Women of Diverse Origin, about the group and what we are standing for. Then we will have a panel on coloniality, indigenous realities, and feminism with 3 speakers. Then we will have a Q&A period. Then we will see a short trailer of a film about the student strikes, which happened which are in their 10 years anniversary this year. Then we will have a panel on racism, Islamophobia, and feminism with three speakers again, another Q&A period afterwards, and we will have another panel on feminism, communities of resistance, with a period of Q&A afterwards. Next panel will be on active solidarity for change, taking struggles forward, building solidarities for change. This will be our last panel with this Q&A period. We will finish the day with a chant together for Azadi or freedom. So without further ado, I will pass the mic to Gladys so that she can talk to us about the Women's of Diverse Origin.
Merci beaucoup, Leila. Je vais partager mon écran. OK, est-ce que c'est correct?
Oui.
Okay. Oui. Donc, bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. Je vais vous présenter un extrait de notre déclaration, mais on vous invite à lire notre déclaration au complet sur notre site web. Nous sommes les femmes de diverses origines et notre organisation existe depuis plus de 20 ans. Nous sommes nés dans la foulée de l'arrêt contre le terror déclenché en 2001 par les États-Unis. Nos communautés migrantes et racisées ont été touchées par cette guerre et les autres qui font rage actuellement, surtout dans les pays du Sud. Nous nous opposons à toute guerre impérialiste parce que nous avons vu l'impact directement sur la vie des femmes ici et ailleurs, principalement dans les pays du Sud. Lors de ces journées internationales des femmes, nous levons la voix pour exiger la paix, un fin aux provocations de l'OTAN et le retrait immédiat des troupes russes de l'Ukraine. La journée des femmes a lieu cette année dans une conjoncture internationale où on assiste à la montée de la droite et ses alliances impérialistes. Cela présente une véritable menace pour le processus démocratique et la souveraineté des peuples. Nous observons même l'épandage féminin du fascisme dans plusieurs pays où des partis de droite sont dirigés par des femmes. Les inégalités sociales basées sur le genre, l'ethnicité creusent encore plus l'écart entre les riches et les défavorisés de ces systèmes axés sur l'exploitation de la force de travail. La mauvaise gestion de la crise sanitaire par le gouvernement a augmenté l'anxiété au sein de la population, permettant que les solutions de la ultra-droite paraissent plausibles pour certains. Le contexte international est également marqué par une crise économique aiguë aggravant les batailles de marché. Les États-Unis et ses alliés, pour étendre leur contrôle jusqu'à la porte de la Russie, alimentent une situation de conflit dans la région. Nous nous réclamons de l'héritage des femmes de Saint-Pétersbourg en 1917 qui sont descendues dans la rue lors de la journée des femmes pour réclamer la paix et du bien. Elles ont ouvert une voie à une révolution. Mais comment ça répercute cette situation internationale au Canada et au Québec? La pandémie a mis en lumière les inégalités aiguës dans la société canadienne et québécoise. Les emplois précaires assumés majoritairement par les femmes, notamment les femmes racisées, sont essentiels pour la société. Et paradoxalement, les femmes vivent une perte importante d'emplois. Nous attendons toujours les résultats de l'approche féministe à la reprise économique promise par le gouvernement fédéral. Les familles croulent sur le poids des prix exorbitants des produits alimentaires et des autres nécessités. La pandémie a exercé une pression extrême sur le système de santé et les mesures destinées à contrer les effets de la COVID ne combleront pas les vides créés par les sous-financements et les coupes budgétaires chroniques. D'un autre côté, la crise du logement met une partie de plus en plus importante de la population dans une situation précaire. Sans investissement massif dans les parcs de logements à prix abordable, les gens ne pourront pas plus se louer. Nous observons une montée de la droite à échelle locale avec des lois discriminatoires comme la loi 96 qui pénalise les populations autochtones, les populations racisées, les immigrants, les réfugiés et les empêchant d'accéder aux services de base dans leur langue maternelle. Nous reconnaissons la pression vécue par les peuples québécois à cause du français au Canada, mais le gouvernement qui parle en leur nom est devenu l'oppresseur dans l'effort de protéger leur langue. Sur ce même registre, le racisme systémique et l'islamophobie deviennent plus apparents avec les effets discriminatoires de la loi 21, empirant la situation des populations déjà marginalisées, surtout des femmes. Nous parlerons de ces choses dans les 4 panels que nous avons préparés pour vous. En plus de parler de lutte contre le patriarcat, le racisme systémique et la précarité au travail, nous allons rendre hommage à la résistance et aux luttes inspirantes en cours par des femmes à travers le Canada et dans le monde. Par exemple, nous sommes ravis d'avoir avec nous une femme trempée dans la lutte du peuple de Wet'suwet'en contre les pipelines. Cette lutte héroïque est non seulement pour défendre leur territoire, mais aussi pour protéger la même nature et la même planète que nous partageons tous et toutes. Nous accueillons aussi un des leaders de la lutte pour défendre le Chinatown à Montréal, une communauté aussi racisée et discriminée qui s'est mobilisée pour stopper la destruction de ces patrimoines de leur communauté. Nous entendrons aussi l'histoire de 12 organisations phares de femmes de Montréal, le Centre de Femmes Sud-Asiatiques, qui compte plus de 40 ans, et PINAI, Organisation de femmes philippines, qui a célébré ses 30 ans l'année dernière. Elles ont fait leur marque sur toute la société et la communauté des femmes de Montréal, et même du Canada et du monde. Aussi, nous remercions Farida de l'Association des femmes musulmanes pour son participation. Nous avons la chance d'avoir avec nous des femmes qui ont été des chefs de file de luttes historiques récentes. En Inde, la mobilisation énorme des paysans et des petits agriculteurs a réussi à faire reculer des lois réactionnaires du mouvement Modi. Aussi, un des dirigeants du mouvement paysan en Haïti, un autre pays qui croule sous les assauts d'un régime réactionnaire et de contrôle étranger. Nous avons beaucoup à apprendre les uns des autres et avons hâte de construire et de renforcer nos solidarités. Vive la résistance des femmes, vive la solidarité et la sororité. Merci.
Merci Gladys. Je vais me faire voir aussi. Alors, là, je vais passer la parole à Saadatou, qui va faciliter notre prochain speech, dont le titre est « Colonialité, réalités, autochtones et féminisme ». Alors, je passe la parole à Saadatou.
Merci Marie-Claude. Mon nom est Saadatou Abdelkarim. Je travaille dans le milieu communautaire sur un projet de la TCRI dédié aux femmes et je suis membre du comité 8 mars des femmes de diverses origines. Merci à toutes et tous d'être là. Puis je suis contente d'accueillir nos 3 panélistes. Le premier panel va parler de colonialité, des réalités autochtones, des rapports nord-sud, du patriarcat. Bien sûr, ça change, les nomenclatures changent selon les contextes. Mais en introduction, je dirais que les inégalités de pouvoir entre pays et à l'intérieur des pays semblent tout à fait exister de tout temps. Mais quand on regarde notre monde d'aujourd'hui, en remontant historiquement, on voit bien que les structures de notre monde aujourd'hui remontent à environ 500 ans, sinon un peu plus. On date souvent à partir de 1492. Et on se rend compte aussi que les rapports asymétriques nord-sud, notamment le néocolonialisme, les accords asymétriques économiques, les guerres géostratégiques, impérialistes, toutes ces situations-là peuvent être différentes, peut-être spécifiques d'un endroit à un autre, mais on a un continuum de domination avec des mécanismes de récupération des acquis de résistance, avec des mécanismes de criminalisation aussi de la résistance. Alors pour les femmes, ce qui se passe, c'est que les patriarcats endogènes qu'elles vivent sont renforcés et aggravés quelque part par la colonialité du genre. Alors le panel, les trois panélistes vont évoquer des situations dans lesquelles qu'elles ont documentées ou sur lesquelles elles travaillent dans leur contexte, mais aussi elles vont faire un peu voir les différences et les similarités de ces situations. Et un autre point aussi qu'elles vont évoquer, c'est comment on construit la solidarité. Sans plus tarder, je vais commencer par la première panéliste. Elle va elle va faire sa présentation, puis par la suite, la deuxième va intervenir et ensuite la troisième. La première panéliste que nous accueillons aujourd'hui, c'est Marlene Hale. Elle est une aînée Wet'suwet'en, excusez-moi de la prononciation. Elle est militante, chef et éducatrice, née au pied des montagnes de la baie d'Edison à Smithers, en Colombie-Britannique. Elle vit à Tiohtià:ke, entre parenthèses Montréal, depuis 2012. Elle attire l'attention sur les combats des Wet'suwet'en pour la souveraineté. Donc, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir Marlene Hale. Je vous cède la parole.
Bonjour, comment ça va à tous? C'est mon nom. My name is Marlene Hale, and I am from the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and so happy to be with so many beautiful faces that I have not seen for some time, because I think we have not all spoken together in person, and to see some of your faces, Dolores, the ones that I know. Thank you, Marie, for inviting me for today, and I also like to I would like to dedicate this also to two beautiful women, Lee Maracle and Bell Hook. My fight and my life has changed on a dime. Let's just go back February the 8th, 2019. A day I just do my normal thing. I'm a chef by trade. I'm catering. I got a call. There's a big activism going downtown, and it's for your nation of the Wet'suwet'en. So I quickly finished my work. I went down and I just picked up the microphone and do what I always do. I've always got my drum with me. I drum. And from there, the media showed up and asked me many questions. And I think I will never forget the first question that was ever asked to me was, if the Prime Minister was here today, what would you say to him? My answer to that was, he sold us out. I remember going to some meetings with my chiefs, hereditary chiefs, in our feast house going back in Whitsett, BC, where I am from. And we were still struggling at that time from 1997 with the big court case of its time, where my mother, Guhet is her name, was a chief, and she had witnessed it at that time in 1997. And the Demel Gastewe court case. And many things have traveled through my involvement in the Wet'suwet'en struggle right now with CGL pipeline going through our territory. As we all know, with feminists are mired in coloniality. We all know that, there's past colonial, there's, the oppressor As I just spoke, the government, Trudeau, and the survival it's just not an academic skill. I can remember even in my own career, no matter what I've done, I've always done it along with a lot of males, and I stood alone. I was used to being spoken to in a sense, you do really good work, but there's one problem. And I say, what? And they say, you're a woman. Whoa, I was like, I would say to my chefs in the past, I said, I'll come back and I'll prove you wrong. And it's just one thing in our patriarchy world we've always had to do. We've always had to stand alone. We've always had to prove ourselves. We always had to prove it through our voice and through, whether it's slavery back then, if it's, unfree labor, we're still dealing with it now, whether it's women's rights agenda, whether in Indigenous, we're missing and murdered Indigenous women, we struggle, we fight for it, we will not give up. We have zero tolerance within ourselves. We deal with gender-based violence all the time. And we somehow have got a very thick skin with anything that comes towards us. And whether it's a very racialized community where I come from, sadly, my little town of Smithers, BC is right now, it's a beautiful little scenic town with, it looks just like a little alpine town with the beautiful mountains, the lake below, and the little town itself, where I was born. And I remember going back often, visiting to Smithers, BC, and my sisters still live there, and she would say all the time, it's very hard to be living in this town, no matter how small it is. It's harder in towns than it is in a city. A city we can gather with our groups, and we can be combed in. We can be sticking together, but you're in a town. Your oppressor is the racial violence that you go through. And quite often you're used to hearing saying that, why don't you just go back to where you came from? And it's really hard to explain to them, well, this is where I came from. This is where I was born. And going back to my mother, my grandmother, when you drive through the little town of our Smithers, BC, there's a statue. They didn't realize when they put up this statue, it's of a woman, and she's carrying a railway tie. And they're heavy. And this was very heavy. It was my grandmother. And it goes back to when my grandmother was in her time, she had to stand alone as a woman. And she was in her 60s, still carrying railway ties into the railway cars. And how she had to prove to all the men and that she could do the work just as much as they could. And that's why she's in the statue of Smithers, BC today. So it's where we go through our past colonialism and to where I am today now with alliances, like feminist alliances like yourselves. We all look in the mirror each day and we understand, through documenting many things that what we will tolerate and what we have done. And I just spoke recently with the mayor of Montreal on systemic racism on Martin Luther King Day. And I was very honored to say that I would like to go look to people like Martin Luther King. It was my honor and always to I would like to see mandatory and extensive anti-racism and anti-oppression training for all public sector workers in Quebec was one of the things that I said. And my people are among the most impacted by these injustices. Right now, my community of the Wet'suwet'en Nation is facing the worst ever of genocide. And I think my time is up. It's hard for me to put everything into 7 to 8 minutes. And I thank everyone for coming, and I'm anxious to hear what everyone else has to say in this eradicating systemic racism through education and accountability systems that we really need in this day of ours. Thank you, Messiah.
Merci beaucoup, Marlene. Merci. Je vous inviterai aussi à mettre vos questions sur le chat. Comme ça, elle aura l'occasion d'approfondir davantage ce qu'elle a déjà présenté. Merci beaucoup. Donc, je vais inviter Hala Marshood, qui est la deuxième intervenante sur ce panel. Hala est organisatrice politique et féministe palestinienne. Elle est membre de Tal'at, un mouvement politique féministe palestinien lancé en 2019. Elle est également chercheuse en économie politique, se concentrant sur l'étude de l'économie de l'occupation israélienne et de l'implication commerciale dans celle-ci. Donc, j'inviterai Hala Marshood à intervenir. Merci, Hala.
Hello, everyone. Hi, yes, thank you for the introduction and for having me here. I'm really excited. Yeah, so my name is Hala. I'm talking to you right now from Palestine. I would start with talking about what kind of material reality the Israeli colonial system has created to the lives of the Palestinians, but more specifically to the lives of women and marginalized groups more generally. And then maybe to talk a little bit more about the current situation now and how we see change or parts of the change. So maybe I could just start with saying what the dispossession and the stripping of material and mental resources has done to the Palestinian society as a whole. And this stripping of our resources, all kinds of resources throughout the years from the Nakba in 1948 until now, has meant that the stronger groups within our society have been practicing violence within the tiniest and smaller units, such as the family, and who have been bearing the brunt of this reality are the women, of course, the weakened and more marginalized. And what Israel has done throughout the years, Israel has basically strengthened the traditional kinship structures within the Palestinian society. What it meant to do is give incentives to people who would collaborate with the colonial system, people within the Palestinian society to collaborate. And what this has done actually is two things. It has also widened the economic gaps between people within the Palestinian society and created a new class, but it also strengthened the traditional kinship structures within the society. Thus, when a woman, for example, is facing violence, when leaves home to seek refuge or to seek any kind of help, the person collaborating with the Israeli system would turn her back home, and basically nobody would offer her any kind of help or shelter. And this is just one manifestation of the ways in which Israel as a colonial system and as a colonial mode of operation has done within the Palestinian society. Is this continued both fragmentation, dispossession, but also weakening those that are already weakened. And what we see now, for example, is that these strategies have continued. The situation has not changed. What we see now, what Israel has tried to do with the Palestinian society is co-opt parts of it and leaving the other parts extremely, extremely marginalized and impoverished, and still widening the class gaps and the economic gaps between people within the Palestinian society. And what this has meant is that those who are impoverished are basically ghettoized, are living in ghettos in what is now called mixed cities. That mixed cities meaning cities that with Palestinian and Israeli residents. And while the Israeli residents live in luxurious and fancy homes, the Palestinians in the cities are living in ghettoized and impoverished situations, and are forced into crime, and are forced into seeking money within the black market, for example, and this has increased the crime levels within the Palestinian society. And again, who is bearing the brunt of this reality are those that are already weakened, most weakened and marginalized within society, i.e. women, children, youth, and those who are impoverished and the poorer ranks of society. And while now what Israel is trying to do under the guise of providing protection to women or providing protection against crime within the Palestinian society is increased policing and increased surveillance. And I think we all here know or can imagine what it means for a colonial entity to increase policing and increase surveillance on a colonized population. And what is now actually being done is that the police is being portrayed as the protector. And the police, unfortunately, even people within the Palestinian society think that the police can be a solution to our social problems. And what we as feminists here in Palestine are trying to do is say that the police can never protect the oppressed. Here in Palestine and everywhere else in the world, the police is always the protector of the regime. The police is always the protector of the oppressor, the protector of certain class and elites in society. And here, the police is a colonial arm of a wider colonial entity. It has no intention in protecting either women or anybody else. And we see that even in terms of when, for example, women are facing violence within homes and then go to the police because they don't have any other kind of solution and go to the police, all the cases of domestic violence are closed and dismissed. Almost 80% of the cases are closed or dismissed. Because this system has no intention in making the lives of the Palestinians better, because it contradicts its reason for being. And what we are trying to do now as feminists is try to imagine something a bit more different. Is acknowledging, first of all, that the situation that we're living in now, the social conditions that we are living in now in Palestine is extremely difficult. And it has to do with years of colonization and years of capital accumulation that is happening basically on our bodies and at our expense. And what we want to do basically is say that for us to be able to function as a society that respects its women and all of its individuals, is that we want to build social solidarity structures within our society. We want to be able to protect each other from internal violence and from the violence that is practiced on us from the Israeli colonial system. And this is what we are trying to do, or basically trying to get people to think of the ways in which we can build these social solidarity structures and to imagine Palestine that we want. We want a free Palestine. We want a free Palestine from colonialism, from capitalism, but we also want a Palestine that is safe. We also want a Palestine that is safe for all its members. And I know I ran out of time, so I'm going to stop now. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Hala. On va se reprendre tout à l'heure pendant les questions s'il y a d'autres choses à approfondir. Merci. Nous allons accueillir la troisième panéliste qui est Meenakshi Mannoe. Meenakshi s'est définie aussi comme une colonisatrice qui vit sur les territoires non cédés des peuples Musqueam, Squamish et Tsleil-Waututh depuis 2006. Je vous demande de m'excuser pour la prononciation. Elle travaille actuellement à la Pivot Legal Society en tant que responsable de la campagne sur la criminalisation et le maintien de l'ordre. Donc, vous pouvez lire davantage sur sa présentation dans le programme. Elle a une maîtrise en travail social de l'Université de British Columbia. En plus de son travail de jour, elle est membre du conseil d'administration de la Community Radio Education Society, programmatrice à Vancouver Co-op Radio, Stark-Raven est membre du Vancouver Prison Justice Day Committee et du Defense 604 Network. Donc, Meenakshi a plusieurs implications. Donc, je vais lui demander d'intervenir. À vous, Meenakshi.
Thank you so much, Saadatou, and thank you to women of diverse origins for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor to speak alongside both Marlene, Hale, and Hala, Marshood. So again, thank you. As mentioned, I'm joining this morning from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations in what is colonially known as Vancouver, BC. And I live on these territories as an uninvited guest and settler, as a racialized settler and the daughter of immigrants to Canada from India and Suriname. I wanted to talk this morning about the work that I do, which is around fighting the harms of criminalization, policing, and prisons in particular, and draw those themes into this global context. So the work that I do at Pivot Legal Society is on the criminalization and policing campaign. And Pivot is an organization that's based in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which is often known through very stigmatizing stories in the media. But the downtown east side of Vancouver is an area that has a concentration of people living in poverty, of people who rely on informal and criminalized economies to generate income, people who have really been abandoned by systems that we are told are here to care for us. And in that, we see and know that there's a high population of Indigenous people who have been displaced multiple times from their traditional and ancestral territory to the inner city, where they are then subject to really inappropriate and colonial programs like housing that evicts them very easily. So this kind of cyclical displacement. And then what I'm going to talk about is the ways that they're further displaced on the street. So in my work, I really do focus on the harms of police and police policy. And I know that Marlene can speak very well to the context of Wet'suwet'en, where we see the RCMP doing violence regularly. And in the city that I live in, we know that the local police force, the Vancouver Police Department, is also undertaking harm. It's not necessarily directed by industry like CGL. I would say here that it's very much directed by capital and the flow of capital, the demands of gentrification and racial capitalism. And I wanted to focus on the harms of street sweeps and how they are targeting people who rely on public space. And I know that oftentimes when we're talking about police accountability, homelessness, women, Two-Spirit, and trans people are often erased from that narrative. Their stories aren't told and their experiences of homelessness are invisibilized. And so we end up with a very problematic image. And I think in Canada, we have this idea of who is homeless and who is navigating police as a disenfranchised man, a disenfranchised white man who's disconnected from his community. And I really want to highlight how many women I know, and in particular, how many Indigenous women I know who are living in tent cities, who are living on the street or relying on public space. Women who are not only navigating homelessness and those social services, but also MCFD, so child welfare services, income assistance, healthcare. And I think that's a really important part of approaching this intersectionally. So in Vancouver, we have this practice that's known as a street sweep. So every day, every single day, sometimes multiple times a day in the downtown east side, we have the police and city workers come down the street, and ostensibly they're doing that to keep the street clean. But really what's happening is they're dismantling people's shelters, so tents and tarps that they live in, and then they are telling them to move along. To where? No one knows, because we have a 0% affordable housing rate of vacancy. But we have the police alongside these city workers doing this every single day. And in the course of dismantling people's homes, which again, I want to draw that parallel to the Zionist occupation of Palestine, where we know that occupying forces are also dismantling people's homes and evicting them from their homes. We have the police and city workers dismantling their homes, throwing away precious and irreplaceable objects. I'm talking about family photos, memorabilia of people's babies, phones. You know, a phone itself is very precious when you don't have a lot of access to technology, when you don't have a place to plug in your alarm clock so you wake up on time. And all of this is impacting women, and there's been a few high-profile stories that have generated some interest in the media about women who have had their parents' ashes thrown out, women who have had their walkers thrown out, really horrifying examples that highlight the criminalization of poverty. And what I want to really emphasize as I wrap up is how this criminalization of poverty in so-called Vancouver really mirrors what today's panels will highlight, right? The situation for women living globally, in the global South and the global North, in so-called Canada. Many of the same violent colonial heteropatriarchal power structures exist. And to also invite people here to consider the role that the police are taking in your own communities, in the ways that they are policing women living in poverty, women living precariously. And I also want to just close by noting that these women are also used as a political pawn when it comes to talking about police budgets or military budgets. We've seen that with both Canada's justifications for war internationally, and we see it here when the police try to justify $100 million budgets by saying that we need those services to keep women safe. And any feminist organizer knows that the police are not the ones keeping women safe. We are the ones who keep us safe. So thank you so much again to the organizers today for inviting me, and yeah, really happy to be part of this panel.
Merci beaucoup Meenakshi. Merci à toutes les trois pour tout ce que vous avez partagé avec nous. Nous avons quelques questions. Nous avons 2 questions en fait sur le chat. La première question s'adresse à Marlene Hale. Elle est en anglais, je vais essayer de la lire. J'espère que ça va être clair. Can Marlene update? C'est une question qui vient de Diane. Elle dit, can Marlene update us briefly on the struggle of the Wet'suwet'en with regard to coastal gas link? C'est une question qui est adressée à Marlene. Est-ce que Marlene, vous pouvez répondre? Et je vais aussi, il y a une question pour Hala. si elle peut noter quelles résistances féminines peuvent s'organiser en Palestine pour contrer les violences faites aux femmes. Marlene, sur les coastal gas links.
Oui. Yes, I'd be happy to update you on the Unistoten Wet'suwet'en. As we know that Gidam Dan with Molly Wickham, she is known as Slato. She's the chief holding ground. She's also the one that was the last ones that were arrested. There was over 20 arrests, and all the court cases are still going to be just that sitting at. I'm sure it's going to happen just like it did the year before, where everybody will be, for now, just being told that there was no charges, but they are not to interfere with the CGL anymore or go near the territory. And it came up to two places that where the women who were so viciously arrested by the RCMP, where my work is not only in Wet'suwet'en, is in Ferry Creek on Vancouver Island, because of the very important ruling by Judge Thompson, who is going to make a difference, hopefully, with the charges against all land defenders, and because of the police misconduct and how they are viciously arresting people, where as of last year, when I was there, there was the worst case of criminality by the RCMP. It was, I've been doing my fight for it for racial profiling and many other things to get the resignation of RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lackey. Since then, with that happening, many things where people were arrested in November in Wet'suwet'en, where all the water protectors, land defenders were viciously arrested, and along with journalists and many other legal observers, and our hands were just tied at that time. And the lawyers for them with CGL are going to be going back to court on the 14th. They had postponed that one. And other things that have been happening, as we have all seen the last little while, where the RCMP and CGL had reported that there was millions of dollars of equipment damaged in the territory where they were working, and there was over 20 people. They said with axes, and they were threatening. They did a lot of damage. So still today, the finger is pointed at the Wet'suwet'en people, of course, and they still have not had any. Even though with the cameras, it's a very clear story where it's not the Wet'suwet'en, it's either the RCMP had done it themselves or CGL. Absolutely. And that still is upcoming, and we're still waiting on word on how that is. And then they were waiting for our hereditary chiefs to put a statement, and they find when Was, who is our hereditary chief, put a statement out, he mentioned that he doesn't make statements just because they ask. And every time they ask, he doesn't have to jump for them, meaning the government and everyone else. So it's on his terms with everything else. And so they finally put the statement out, and they will just not tolerate the violence put onto our territory of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and the violence of the RCMP as well.
Ok, excusez-moi, Marlene. Est-ce que je peux vous demander de compléter la réponse dans le chat, s'il vous plaît? Si vous pouvez compléter dans le chat.
Absolutely, absolument.
Merci, merci beaucoup. On va demander à Hala de parler les questions qui sont posées. En fait, il y en a deux questions. Il y a une question qui est posée sur l'organisation des résistances contre les violences faites aux femmes. Puis, il y a une question qui lui demande qu'est-ce qu'elle pense de l'attention des médias, l'attention qui est donnée au conflit. What do you think of the media attention given to the conflict in Ukraine compared to the attention given to the Palestinian struggle? Je vais dire à Hala aussi, j'ai vu des Viva Viva Palestine, Free Palestine. So, Hala, est-ce que vous pouvez répondre?
Yes, thank you.
Brièvement, vous pouvez compléter dans le chat pour les détails.
Should I go? Yeah. If I understood the first question correctly, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe just to explain the landscape a bit in terms of feminist organizing here in Palestine. And I think this will relate to another question that was asked, that was addressed to me. Well, first of all, let's start by talking about Tal'at. The movement that I'm with is not an organization, it's actually a political movement. What we try to do is to create kind of a cumulative and ongoing social change and political and social intervention, where we see that a feminist analysis is kind of needed. So it's kind of widening the discourse around feminism and feminist issues, and around violence within the Palestinian society, and enforce wider emancipatory politics to the current political discourse within Palestine that for years has mainly focused on freedom from the Israeli colonial regime, but didn't actually take into consideration internal violence and violence against women and marginalized groups more generally. And what we try to do in Tal'at is force a wider emancipatory politics and talk about justice more widely, and talk about how our struggle for liberation from the Israeli colonial system can be more just. But then other than Tal'at, we have organizations that do provide accompaniment and support for women who are facing violence. And some of these organizations provide shelters and so on. But of course, it differs from place to place, because, for example, within the Green Line, within the 48 borders where I am currently at, we see more of these organizations. But unfortunately, in a place like Gaza, for example, that is under a horrific siege, you don't see these kinds of organization. And I remember when we were asked by women or relatives of women who are being beaten in their home in Gaza, what can they do? We found ourselves unable to provide any kind of answer, because the situation there is horrifying. And in the West Bank as well, you do see some of these organizations, but the effectiveness and the increased NGOization as well of these structures also has its downsides, and many women do not find any kind of support or shelter. So this is kind of like the landscape, let's say, here in Palestine. Although there is some effort by some organizations to provide support, unfortunately, it is still not enough. And what I want to add in this, I'm gonna finish about this point, is that the problem has been that these kinds of issues, the violence against women, has either been confined to NGOs or have been considered women-only issues. Therefore, there hasn't been any kind of political or wider political or social discussion on them. And this is what we're kind of trying to change through Tal'at. And the question about...
Excusez-moi, Hala, merci beaucoup. En fait, je vais devoir vous demander de répondre pour le reste de la question dans le chat. Et puis, est-ce que vous pouvez faire attention, voir s'il y a d'autres questions? Comme ça, vous pouvez détailler vos réponses pour que tout le monde soit satisfait. Donc, merci beaucoup, Hala. Merci à nos panélistes, Marlene et puis Meenakshi. Je vais céder la parole pour passer au prochain panel, mais continuez à poser vos questions dans le chat, puis elles vont poursuivre les réponses. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Saadatou. Thank you to our speakers of the first panel. I just emphasize that there are some other questions for our third speaker in the chat, so I will encourage you to go and respond to these questions in the chat, please. So next we have a cultural item. We will watch together the trailer of film Red Square on a Blackboard about the student strike that mobilized all of Quebec 10 years ago. What started as a demand to free tuition became a discussion about the kind of Quebec we wanted, a Quebec of true solidarity. Marie-Claude?
Oui, en tout cas, je pense que c'est moi. N'est-ce pas?
Oui, vas-y.
Bon, alors oui, c'est ça. Alors pour...
Oui, j'arrive.
Tu es là, Marie-Claude?
Le film est une production de Multimonde qui fête cette année son 30e anniversaire. Notre membre du FDO, Marie Botti, est cofondatrice de Multimonde.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Claude et Leila. Oui, écoute, cette année, il fallait qu'on marque ça parce que c'est le 10e anniversaire de cette grève étudiante québécoise en 2012 qui était appelée le Printemps érable. Et puis, ça a vraiment bouleversé toute la société. C'était une protestation qui a duré plusieurs mois et tout le monde était impliqué. Et puis, je me rappelle... tous les soirs, on sortait sur nos balcons, puis on claquait sur les chaudrons. Et puis aussi, il se trouvait que le 8 mars de cette année-là, nos rangs ont été gonflés par milliers parce qu'on était joints par le mouvement étudiant qui a participé très largement à notre marche aussi. Alors, c'était vraiment, it was really a fantastic, very heady time. And I'm going to share with you a little trailer from a film that was produced by Production Multimonde, our film company, and made by two young filmmakers who were right in the middle of the action there. So let's see now. Hang on a minute. Oops, hang on. Here we go. Okay, and then play. Here we go.
J'annonce donc qu'à l'automne 2012 et à chacune des 4 années suivantes, les droits annuels de scolarité augmenteront de 325 $. Au terme de ce rattrapage progressif qui totalisera 1 625 $ en 2017.
La grève générale, on va se dire, on la fera pas par plaisir.
On doit être l'étincelle qui va redonner aux mouvements sociaux le courage, la combativité nécessaire pour faire un changement qualitatif.
Il faut réaliser que c'est pas juste contre la hausse de la scolarité, en fait que moi je me bats, mais c'est contre le système au complet. C'est parce qu'elle nous appuie! Si la police nous suit, c'est parce qu'elle...
C'est pas vrai que ton parole, c'est un poste comme un autre.
Ouais, le monde a décidé de gagner.
Vous pensez qu'un monde comme ici en ce moment, ça peut fonctionner comme du monde? Bien ça, c'est utopiste pour moi, tu sais.
Il y a une chose qu'on peut pas nous empêcher, c'est de refuser de rentrer en classe.
Je croise mes doigts que les médias ici présents représenteront le geste qu'on est en train de faire ici.
C'est une impasse. C'est vraiment une impasse.
Les vrais changements, mais ils viennent pas nécessairement de cette élite politique-là qui est pris dans un système déjà façonné d'avance.
La grève étudiante n'est pas la fin, mais le début d'une contestation populaire!
Bon, alors c'était un grand moment dans l'histoire. Il y avait deux ministres de l'Éducation qui ont été forcés de démissionner et puis on a renversé le gouvernement de l'époque et puis il y a dû avoir des élections et finalement ces augmentations de frais de scolarité ont été abandonnées à l'époque. Alors bravo de cette belle histoire-là.
Et bravo à toi, Marie, pour avoir su capter ces moments. Merci. Notre prochain panel porte sur le racisme, islamophobie et féminisme. Alors, je passe la parole à notre amie Zainab. Il va nous présenter les panélistes.
Merci beaucoup, Marie-Claude. Moi, je vais faire très court pour l'introduction parce que je sais qu'on a toutes et tous hâte d'entendre nos intervenantes, d'autant plus que ça fait une bonne transition avec la vidéo qu'on vient de voir, parce que maintenant, on va mettre la focale sur Montréal, vraiment tout ce qui se passe à Montréal et ses connexions ailleurs. Est-ce qu'on peut mettre May comme co-host de l'événement? Saadatou, s'il te plaît, comme ça, on va pouvoir voir une présentation. Donc, on va voir avec nous dans le panel May Chou, Marianne Lopez et Farida Mohamed. May Chou, qui va commencer le panel, est avocate. Elle est activiste dans le domaine de la justice sociale, qui lie aussi justice environnementale. Elle est membre de Progressive Chinese of Québec, les Chinoises et Chinois progressifs du Québec, une organisation qui lutte contre le racisme anti-chinois. On aura la perspective féministe et elle est aussi coordinatrice de la table ronde de Chinatown. Fait que là, on va pouvoir l'écouter d'abord pour commencer. Ensuite, elle sera suivie par Marianne et ensuite par Farida. Est-ce que May, tu serais prête à partir tout de suite pour la présentation?
Je pensais que j'étais au 3e panel. Est-ce que quelqu'un peut passer juste avant moi? Je vais juste préparer mon PDF. Excusez-moi.
Oui, pas de problème, pas de problème. Est-ce que, Farida, est-ce que tu voudrais commencer?
Oui, je pourrais. Est-ce que je peux partager mon écran?
Oui.
OK.
Oui. Alors, je vais juste dire un petit mot rapide pour présenter Farida. Farida, I'll do it in English because I have the bio in English in front of me. So Farida Mohamed was born and bred in the Seychelles Islands when they were still a British colony, and she moved to Quebec with her husband in November 1985. Farida worked in medical research from 1986 till 2003 at McGill. And actually she moved to teaching in 2004, first at Marianapolis College teaching chemistry and then in secondary schools teaching science. Now Farida is with us today as the president of the Montreal chapter of the Council of Canadian Muslim Women. And she's involved in striving for women's rights, collaborating with other organizations who seeks to erase racism from institutions, and she's with us today. She's going to talk about the fight against Islamophobia. So Farida, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm speaking to you from Chukchake, which is Montreal. And as pointed out, I am part of a nonprofit national organization with 17 chapters all across Canada. So our mission, you can read it if you will, go to www.ccmw.com. But we're creating amplified awareness of the social injustices that Muslim women and girls face and endure in Canada. And we embrace the diversity that exists within the Muslim communities. CCMW has provided toolkits and resources for Muslim women on various issues. We have had a strengthening capacity project to identify and better understand the unique needs of Canadian Muslim women. During the pandemic, there was a Healing and Wisdom Circle that was initiated, and the National even set up a Black Muslima Shining series to honor and spotlight the work of Black Muslim women. I have to talk about violence against women because a lot of the work we do deal with that. And in fact, a lot of newcomers to Quebec who do not speak French face this discrimination when they try to access the basic needs like health services, social services, public transport, communicating with school personnel when applying for jobs, shopping for food. So another disturbing fact we found, or we all noticed, was that the rate of femicide in domestic households increased during the pandemic due to the lockdown. So that's what I want to address first, violence against women. Now, in 2018, we did have workshops all across Canada. We engaged men and boys to end violence against women. And basically, we sought to question gender norms and stereotypes to undo or unlearn patriarchy, foster healthy relationships. And we also asked other men and boys to educate men and boys in their community. Since last year, we had an online platform put in place to help Canadian Muslim women obtain culturally appropriate legal services and counsel on family law issues. And our CCMW Montreal members also help individuals who reach out to us, those who don't want to go through legal channels because they don't know how to navigate the system, and those also who don't know all the recourses that are open to them. We join Women Aware in their 16 days of activism against gender-based violence every year. And this culminates in an online roundtable discussion on femicide in Quebec. I have to talk about this Project Maple Leaf because prostitution of minors is a very big problem in Canada. In Montreal, as a teacher, I see a lot of school-aged girls who are willing participants because it's a way of making easy money. And Project Maple Leaf is asking for partnerships to eradicate, if you will, prostitution of minors. They use horse therapy to help people heal and get back into the workforce, which is away from prostitution. In terms of Islamophobia, now that has been a lot of our work has been concerned with Islamophobia, because as you know, there's a lot of incidences of Islamophobia, especially gendered Islamophobia facing our hijabi girls. They experience verbal insults, removing of head covers, spitting in the face. You know, there's now online onslaught by social media. Elections are coming up in Quebec, so the Islamophobic comments are on the increase. There's even a case of a tenured Muslim professor being terminated at a Canadian university because he was very verbal about the university's discriminatory hiring practices. Now, one cannot help but wonder if a white tenured professor would have suffered the same fate. So what do? Well, we've been combating Bill 21, which is now law. Since its inception, we've joined Coalition Inclusion Québec and their efforts. They've been trying to bring that into court to get it revoked. There's also the National Council of Canadian Muslims and CCM, which has brought again Bill 21, again trying to get this law revoked in court. But it's always getting thrown out by the judge because the judge rules it's applicable to Quebec, and so it stays. Talking about Advocacy Day to End Bias at Canadian Revenue Agency, this is important because CCMW Montreal participated in that in March 2021. Just to give you a bit of background, the Canadian Revenue Agency has shut down 2 Muslim charities, citing that they are funding terrorism. So let me give you one example. One charity was supplying medical equipment to Gaza hospitals. And since the CRA judged that Hamas is controlling Gaza, therefore, this charity must be helping to fund terrorism, not looking at the fact that it's supplying medical equipment and supplies to hospitals. Yet, it's common knowledge that there's a lot of other faith-based Canadian charities supplying funds towards initiatives for foreign armies, yet the CRA does not apply the same standards. So we joined other Muslim organizations and NCCM. We asked members of parliament, what can they do to remove the Islamophobic lens that the CRA applies when judging which charity stays in operation and which charity gets their status revoked. We also contributed to NCCM's National Summit on Islamophobia in July 2021. And I will just show you the suggestions we made. And these were mostly suggestions to tackle Islamophobia addressed mostly to provincial and municipal governments, like, for example, promoting ads on TV that show diversity, portray girls and women wearing hijab, monitor groups or individuals that spew out hate, hold them accountable, ensure that hate crimes are properly defined so there's no ambiguity because we heard in Quebec after the Quebec massacre that this young man was not considered to be a terrorist. That was not a hate crime or a terrorist crime. And we asked to fund initiatives by Muslim groups who want to counter racism and Islamophobia. And it was important for us to ask government can mainstream media be pressured to use neutral language, because their language is always biased against Muslims, to promote Islamic Heritage Month, to provide jobs for women wearing hijab because they're the ones facing the most discrimination, to fund minorities who show entrepreneurship, to put in laws place that prevent discrimination in housing, or to provide affordable housing for marginalized communities, to have more diversity on the police force at the municipal level, to provide services in different languages to serve our local populations, to set up workshops in schools that will educate and sensitize students about all forms of racism, to include, and this is very important, include indigenous content, Asian, African, Latin American contributions of Muslims in curriculum of schools, to add the narratives of other than those of white people in the art and the film world. We also, currently we have a digital anti-racism education project. This is funded by Heritage Canada, and this project defines what Islamophobia is, describes the forms of online hate. It trains Muslim women how to address them rather than react negatively to them. We already had an English workshop on the 30th of January, and the next one, a French workshop, is going to take place on 29th of March at noon during the Semaine d'Action contre le Racisme. Here is a poster, and maybe we can get it out to you guys so you can register and attend. There is a Muslim Awareness Week that's been going on the last week of January for the past 4 to 5 years. We have one of our board members, Sama Elibiari, who sits on the committee that plans the events for Muslim Awareness Week. And it's not only to create awareness about Islamophobia and harm it causes, but it also showcases, highlight different aspects of Muslim culture. We do collaborations with other organizations, with the Institute of Research and Education on Race Relations. We have been helping to recruit participants who have undergone racial profiling, either with the police or in the education system or in the workplace or even in the shopping mall, to contribute to the statistics. We've participated in 2 press conferences held by Marvin Rotrand, asking the City of Montreal to legislate against anti-Asian racism and to increase recruitment for the hate crime unit of the Montreal Police Force. We add our signatories to many petitions and letters of other women's organizations as well as other organizations. We network with a lot of different organizations, and we have also a future collaboration with researchers looking at the effects of Bill 21 on Muslim women. And to end off, just a bit of good news here. Funding has been allocated by Canadian Heritage to 8 Muslim organizations so far, to the tune of 1.8 million. We can see a bit more diversity portrayed in TV ads, more minorities hired as journalists in mainstream media. I've seen more TV series that feature Black content. So I'll just end there because I think I've gone over my time. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Farida, for this very complete panorama on your work. And I will right away continue with the fight against racism by its multiple form by asking Marlene Lopez if she can join us right now. Thank you, Marlene. I can see you now. So Marlene is a Black feminist activist and community organizer, and she works a lot on issues tackling and surrounding anti-Black racism, gender-based violence, police violence, and its intersections. She's currently co-vice president of the Fédération des Femmes du Québec, and she's a program and outreach coordinator at the Simone de Beauvoir Institute. And she's now with us today to give us a glimpse maybe on the current state actually of the struggle and the fight against violences be it structural, such as institutional racism, and or life-threatening violences, like the one conducted by the police. And we would love to hear more about your work, Marlene.
Thank you, Zainab. Thank you for the invitation. It's super inspiring to hear from fellow feminists engaged in resistance against state violence here locally and also globally. I just want to highlight previous words said by Hala Marshood, who said that the police is always there to protect the oppressor. That really resonated. And also Meenakshi, who said, we are the ones that keep each other safe. Thank you for those words. They really, really spoke to me. So my involvement within the feminist movement has been mainly within the anti-violence movement. I've been organizing in the anti-violence movement for many years, specifically in the struggle to end sexual violence. In terms of the state of social movements here in Quebec right now, I feel that different anti-racist social movements like Black Lives Matter and social movement work around Islamophobia, compounded also by the effects of the pandemic, have pushed the more mainstream feminist movement to reckon with their politics and their continuous rapprochement or proximity to the state. And we know historically the feminist movement has acted as a sort of contre-pouvoir, resisting neoliberal state agendas. But today we're a bit of witness to a mainstream feminist movement that is engaging in a more uncritical collusion with the state at a time where there are social movements that are resisting state violence. And so the pandemic has provided opportunities to resist this neoliberal agenda because it has increased inequity and inequality. And it also has created the conditions for more intimate partner violence, but also for state violence through increased policing, punishment, and surveillance. It's also created the conditions for coalition work for resisting this state repression and policing. And I'm talking about the birth of the coalition to defund the SPVM or the police. So for the last 2 years, I've been doing coalition work to raise awareness on violence of policing and also to foster conversations on community safety as public safety. We've pushed for municipal and provincial investments in housing, education, health, including mental health support services, employment, etc., investment in community. I've also been working with feminist movements and initiating conversations on prison abolition as a feminist value. It's been an opportunity to address how the mainstream anti-violence feminist movement has started or has engaged in prioritizing judiciarization, criminalization, and investment in policing in the fight to end gender-based violence. It's been an opportunity to address how patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism are compounded and reinforced through state, carceral, and punitive systems. And so we've also been invited to talk about the challenges of organizing within a pandemic and also the opportunities. For me, the main challenge is witnessing this increased surveillance and criminalization of our community members, but it's also been the isolation and the threat of becoming sick for disabled folks, those living with chronic illness, and just being witness to the ableist responses to the pandemic meant we couldn't organize the way that we used to. But it's brought opportunities to engage in these important conversations. And I remember, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had here in Montreal, within the feminist movement, we had an important conversation about the importance of denouncing racial capitalism, specifically the precarity of Black community members who are facing and heightened vulnerability doing care work. The overrepresentation of Black women in care work and in job positions that are extremely precarious brought important conversations about systemic racism and how it was playing out during the pandemic. So it also brought an opportunity to articulate and to identify the world we want to live in the future, knowing that things will never or can never be the same. The opportunity to engage in conversations around abolition, around investing in that world, in that city, in that community that we want to see emerge in the future. For me, the pandemic has also been an opportunity to do coalition work. Before the pandemic, most of the work I did was really concentrated within the Black community, but during the pandemic, there have been multiple opportunities to engage in coalition work. Locally, it has meant organizing with diverse communities impacted by state violence. That has meant organizing with community organizations that service communities, resisting systemic racism, but also homophobia, transphobia, ableism, and state neglect in general, making them or putting them at a higher systemic risk of facing state violence. At an international level, it has also opened opportunities to connect. I've had the privilege to engage in feminist conversations with anti-racist movements and feminist movements in Haiti, Cuba, and also Puerto Rico. In terms of the prison abolitionist feminist movement building, there are important connections to be made and established at a global, at the global level. So I think I will end with a quote from former political prisoner Susan Sachs. She says, "My feminism does not drive me into the arms of the state, but even further from it." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. That was really super inspiring. And yeah, we can now also it's actually super inspiring, all the presentations. It's very hard to move from one presentation to the other, but they are all linked and connected somehow or another. So May, we are very happy to have you with us today, and we would love to hear about your work on the fight against anti-Chinese racism, and also your work in the Chinatown Roundtable. So let's hear from you right away.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I wasn't prepared earlier. I was hoping not to be last, because it's always much more challenging to go after such amazing speakers who just spoke before me, but I'll try my best. So you know what, I just want to, I know I'm supposed to be talking about the present movement, the present race movement against anti-Asian hate, and from a feminist perspective, but I just wanted to situate the anti-Asian, especially the racism against Asian women in the historical context. Because usually when Marlene was just making a criticism of the dominant, mainly white feminist movement, and so I think that part of the approach is to assume that people from other countries, from the South, people from non-white countries are really backwards, that they don't understand how to protect women's rights, and we don't know what women's equalities are, and we are really horrible to, racialize women or women of color. But I just wanted to remind people or everyone that in terms of the Asian Canadian context, especially women's context, I'm not going to go into the history of the horrendous impact of the head tax against the Chinese community, but I wanted to signal that one of the worst effects of the Chinese head tax was the eradication of Chinese women in Canada. The effect of the head tax meant that the recruitment for male labor excluded largely women and wives and daughters and children from coming to Canada to join their partners in Canada. And so just to cite a couple of statistics, between 1906 to 1924, the ratio of Chinese men to women was 3,578 men to 100 women. And in Quebec, until 1945, 90% of all Chinese people living in Quebec were men. And so if, we're talking about, in China, there's a male preference, and isn't that terrible? I think that, the worst statistics against, on gender imbalance happened in Canada, and I think it's probably happened in the United States and New Zealand and Australia and all the other countries that imposed some kind of taxes on Chinese immigrants. And it wasn't until 1947 that Chinese women and children were finally able to come to Canada to join their families. And by this time, most women had been separated from their spouses for decades. And once they arrived, they were advanced in age, and they spent the rest of their lives doing very hard labor in restaurants and laundromats in order to pay back the money that their families had to borrow to pay the head tax to the Canadian immigration. So along with that, what does this mean when families are separated or are not able to unite, and especially when women are completely cut out of the picture? It meant that Chinese communities and Chinatowns across the country were stunted. The growth was frozen, and it took years and years to rebuild. And this is a phenomena that happens along with a parallel encroachment into Chinatown space, because the second half of my presentation is about the campaigns about saving Chinatown, but I just wanted to make the link between women's rights and the eradication or the disappearances of Chinatown and the threats against Chinatown. Now, if we move ahead to the last few years, I'll talk about what happened during the pandemic. As we know, the COVID pandemic, it was terrible for everybody, no matter what race, color, language, gender. It was in general, and it's still happening, the effects of, economic exclusion, housing rights, violations, et cetera, it was felt by everybody across the board. But we know that with respect to Asian communities, we suffered not only the COVID-19 pandemic, but we also suffered the pandemic of anti-Asian racism. And this was fueled by, geopolitics. We started with President Trump fueling anti-Chinese sentiment by blaming China for the pandemic. And then it didn't help that, our own Canadian government jumped into the bandwagon by arresting Ms. Meng Wanzhou and playing up to, the American attempts to provoke China into a trade war. And this had horrible consequences for Asian Canadians in North America. The year 2020 saw an unprecedented rise of anti-Asian hate. In that year alone, over 1,000 anti-Asian hate crimes were reported. In the city of Vancouver, there was an increase of anti-Asian hate crimes by 717%. And the other thing is that, the victims of the most vicious anti-Asian hate crimes were women. We, throughout the social media, in actual media, we saw so many reports of Asian women being physically assaulted. Even last week, there was an Asian woman who was followed home and killed in her apartment by this random guy. And the other thing is a lot of the victims of these anti-Asian assaults were senior women. We had and our seniors, especially the women in Chinatown and Chinese communities, they were so scared to go out for fear of being physically assaulted, which is what happened throughout since the beginning of the pandemic. And so and then the worst event that touched off or that exemplified this anti-Asian sexism hate happened in March last year when I think in Atlanta, there were 6 Asian women who were killed by this white guy who was trying to take revenge or targeting Asian sex workers specifically. And in reaction to that, in Montreal, we organized the first large demonstration against anti-Asian hate in North America, and it was very successful. Thousands of people came out in the middle of the pandemic. And it was also, we're really, really grateful for the support of many allied communities who came out and marched with us. And so I think that one of the strongest manifestations of the movement to fight anti-Asian racism is the fight for identity. And this has manifested in the campaigns, like North American campaigns for the past 3 years to save Chinatowns, because Chinatowns have been, which, you know, is the place where we physically congregate, where, you know, we mobilize, where we can be together, where we can show solidarity. You know, they have been disappearing all across North America, and there are now networks of organizations who are trying to save Chinatown. So I'm just going to show a couple of photos from our campaign in Montreal. You know, this is a really big slideshow, so I'm not going to go through most of the photos, but maybe I'll just show you a few key photos. So in 2019, that's when we realized that you can see to the left, there's a picture, well, it's me actually, but there's a huge crane in the background, which is right beside, you know, one of those, the Montreal Chinatown has 4 landmark arches. And this is when we first thought, oh my God, why are these people making huge holes in the middle of our Chinatown? And who gave them permission? And why is the city allowing these developers to come and tear down our buildings and, you know, tear down our homes, raise property taxes, and why aren't we being consulted? So, you know, we called press conferences, we alerted the media, and so what happened is that the city of Montreal, we launched a petition demanding the city to give us a development plan for Chinatown in consultation with the Chinese community. And so so we've been working really hard for the past 2-3 years since the campaign was launched. What I briefly want to say is that one of the most inspiring and positive things about the mobilization to save Chinatown is how truly intergenerational this movement has become. And because it has been intergenerational, people who rally around Chinatown now, the activists, are insistent on making sure that we have an inclusive vision of Chinatown. In Montreal, the Chinatown had been used by not only the Chinese community, but the Jewish community, the French and English, the Scottish communities. And today in the Montreal Chinatown, until last month, there were 2 Indigenous shelters situated right in the heart of Chinatown. So our approach to saving Chinatown, this campaign to save Chinatown, is also from a decolonial perspective. It's from a perspective of also, you know, building solidarities with other communities. Last year in Montreal, there was a really flagrant example of the racial profiling of a Black man who stopped to get takeout for his daughter, and he was you know, aggressively arrested by the police in front of his teenage daughter and thrown into the back of the police car for about 20 minutes, and it really traumatized both him and his daughter. So I think I'm probably running out of time. Part of our fight to preserve Chinatown, like I said, means that we've had to, not have to, but we very happily network with all the other movements across North America to save Chinatown. sorry, I don't know how much time I have left. Maybe I'll just go through very quickly. This is just, we're trying to go to institutions. Yes?
Yeah, just wanted to say like maybe 1 minute to wrap up, Maya.
Okay, I will wrap up. In brief, so what I can say is that after 2 years of campaigning, fighting gentrification, fighting, you know, these big developers who bought up was probably the most historic buildings in Chinatown last year. In January of this year, we finally won provincial and government designations of Chinatown as a historical site that has to be preserved. The most amazing thing is that in order to make this historical designation effective, the government also announced a sort of like a moratorium on development projects in Chinatown. This is just a photo of us participating in municipal debates. And so maybe I'll just leave it. No, I'm good. I'm just gonna end it with this photo. Oh, damn it, I can't find that photo anymore. Sorry, it was a photo of the old Chinatown, the old area of Chinatown that was, that used to, well, that existed, that was recognized as Chinatown, but now also along with the government announcements, it's declared a much larger area of Chinatown that's going to be protected. And so that's a victory for us because, like I said, we've been fighting against the encroachment of Chinatown for decades. And now we finally seem to have won partially what we've asked for. So I'm gonna end it there. I'm sorry, I'm just like nervous because you know I'm running out of time. I had too much to say. Thank you for listening and for having me here.
Oh no, that was amazing. And actually, I was just thinking that it's really cool how it's organically worked out. Actually, to end the panel with like you know a recent victory of a social movement, and it's very inspiring because we are indeed like here to talk about our ongoing struggle, but it's also like very refreshing and energizing to see like you know the victories that social movement can bring and do like to change the face of the city and the lives. I will start with the questions that are going to Marlene because I know that Marlene is like you know has other she needs to leave soon. So maybe I will start with the first question. Which is about the fact that the police are incorporating people of color and diversity into their ranks in attempt to improve their image and acceptance among the racialized population. So Gladys is asking and wondering if you could tell us a bit about how do you see this?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so how do I see diversity hirings?
Yeah.
I see them as a way not to address the real issue of, you know, systemic violence, systemic state violence that is exerted by policing. And I see it as an ahistorical approach to addressing these issues because it doesn't consider that the police has been mandated, has been, you know, the birth of the police comes from, you know, the objective is to ensure the survival of, you know, the colonial white supremacist state. And so the way to protect the interests of this colonial white supremacist state, you need institutions like the police. And so what would diversifying, you know, the members of the force do? For me, it's more a publicity stunt instead of, you know, a real engagement to address the violence of policing, the violence of state, you know, their hand at exercising state violence on communities, specifically communities that are at the margins. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by the way, I would encourage like everybody, if you have any questions, we will still have like 3 minutes. If you would like to put your questions in the chat box. I will continue with the question to Farida. Given the refusal of the CAQ government to acknowledge the existence of Islamophobia, can you tell us like about the strategies that could be implemented? This is again a question from Gladys. If you want to, Gladys, if you want to add anything, like don't hesitate.
Well, we know that this is a very arrogant government we have in place in Quebec at the moment. 2 years ago, 3 of our members met with a political consultant of the CAQ government to make some demands of this government. One of the demands was that could they postpone the enactment of Bill 21, which we see as Islamophobic, by the way, even though it addresses all religious symbols, but we see it very much as an Islamophobic bill because a lot of our hijabi women are teachers or daycare workers. And we did ask them for a postponement. The political consultant said it will take it to the correct ministry. We haven't heard back from them. It's been 2 years. They do not want to dialogue with us. Obviously an arrogant government. What I would suggest is elections are coming up soon. I want every one of us to mobilize our communities as a strategy to get everybody out there to vote and get as many votes as we can and try to establish a government which is much more amenable to racialized communities or who accepts the demography of Quebec as having changed. We no longer have only Québécois de souche population in Quebec. You know, we have to also keep gathering statistics on Islamophobic events. We have to present them to the government. Voilà ce qu'on a, les faits accomplis. We have to keep up that kind of a pressure because obviously there's not much we can do to sway this government. We have to do what we can on the ground.
Yeah, thank you, Farida. I will take another question for May now. There is a question from Barbara, who's wondering if the new waves of migrants of Chinese origin supports the efforts to preserve Chinatowns, considering the Canadian immigration structure has changed to prefer business investor and professional people. So like, you know, richer people from China, other countries. And yeah, so would you tell us a bit about like how the dynamics work on this level?
I'll be very, very brief. So, you know, the phenomenon of Chinatown, of course, is necessarily, I guess, like a North America or non-Asian, non-geographic Asian phenomena, because like, you know, I mean, if you live in China, Hong Kong, or Taiwan, like you don't have like saving Chinatown, right? So in answer to the question, so one of the things that we fought for, or we are still fighting for, is the saving of Chinatown, designation of heritage value, not just as material heritage, because we know that now with the diaspora, people live in all parts of Montreal, especially since the Chinatown towns tend to be very small geographic places. But symbolically, it's in historic Chinatowns that culture and memories of struggle and survival and our history, our living. So what we insist on is the protection of living history, living heritage. And Chinatown is also the site of you know, people still live there. Alive communities are there. Like I was talking about senior women, they live there. They need social services, they need social housing, and lots of cultural activities and social organizations use Chinatown as a base. So one of our you know, in terms of like rebuilding Chinatown or reinforcing Chinatown, is the demand to be inclusive of different generations of Asians, and not just Chinese, right? Like I said, like, you know, we have indigenous communities, we have, you know, different French, English communities that also use Chinatown. So in terms of the roundtable, what we want to do is have a place also for a lot of like the merchants and professionals, students, youth, So we embrace the concept of fighting for a Chinatown that is fully responding to the needs of including different waves of Chinese immigrants and Asian immigrants.
Yeah, thank you, May. And I will take maybe one last question to close the panel, because I can see that the question is addressed more or less to everyone. It's a question from Vijay, and it's in French. So it's about the fact that beaucoup de nos amis issus des communautés racisées ont accepté les normes sociales de la suprématie blanche qui tente de nous dominer. L'enjeu est aussi hyper imbriqué sur le plan cognitif ici au Canada. Et que, en tant que personne racisée, comment peut-on agir au sein de nos communautés diverses pour sensibiliser nos amis et nos familles aux enjeux du capitalisme racial ou racial capitalism? Puis, je vais juste faire une parenthèse parce que j'ai entendu quelque chose l'autre fois où je me souviens plus, j'avais lu un article, quelque chose qui disait qu'on devait peut-être arrêter d'utiliser le terme suprématie blanche et utiliser plutôt sociopathie ou quelque chose pour pas continuer à insister sur ça. Mais ce serait pour une autre discussion. Est-ce que l'une de vous voudrait répondre à cette question?
My 2 cents first is let's start at a young age. We have to address students in schools first, because they are the ones who have to know. If you look at the history books in schools, it's only about white colonialism, white settlers, their history and stuff like that. And it keeps going on and on and on. You learn about also European history. How about adding narratives of other societies out there, other races, other populations? You know, these are barely touched upon. I mean, Indigenous content in itself is not enough in the school. So let's start, I would say, in the school system and get that idea out that, white people's culture are important, let's face it, but other peoples also have narratives that are important.
Marlene, would you like to add something also to conclude?
Maybe I can just say very briefly that, okay, so one of the tactics of organizing our own communities, because our communities is diverse, is this intergeneration conversation. When we don't use words like racial capitalism or decolonialism when we're talking to our elders. If I can, I would really love to talk to Marlene separately after this, because so the younger generation among us are very pro defund, but then how do we have this conversation with our seniors who live in fear of being attacked? And we know that, the COVID vandalism in Chinatown, it caused a lot of fear. People, like stores having vandalized and windows broken, and senior citizens physically attacked. And so I think that we have to, these are conversations that we have to have within our own communities. And this is an excellent question, but it's going to take time. And another way that we're trying to do this is like by insisting that, the campaigns to save Chinatown cannot be done in a silo, that we recognize diversity, we recognize that Chinatown history, as Farida is insinuating, is the history of all of Canada, all of Quebec, all of North America is our history, right? And to make sure that movements are diverse, and we have to always act in solidarity with other racialized communities that are confronted and oppressed by the same, and I like to use the word white supremacist system. And so this is where I'm at.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
I guess the only thing I would add is I think the way forward, and this is something that I've always heard from May Chu, is the importance of cultivating and investing in, solidarity across communities. You know, we can't win the fight against white supremacy, colonialism alone. We do need to, you know, invest in solidarity. And I guess that for this to be able to happen, we need to also, in order for us to invest in that interdependence between communities, we also need to acknowledge how sometimes proximity to whiteness can, you know, become a systemic barrier for movements to converge. And I think this is something I've heard in a lot of communities. There's sometimes a sense of distrust in terms of historical distrust with other communities because of experiences of how people capitalize and movements capitalize in terms of proximity to whiteness. And so I guess it's important for us to be in solidarity and understand that while a specific struggle, whether it be policing, because certain communities aren't really bearing the brunt of policing and the violence of police brutality, but to stand in solidarity, even though, you know, they might not be the most impacted by a struggle, and to always center those margins. I think that's what's important in continuing and converging against these systems that have an impact on all of us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maria and May and Felida. That was really extremely inspiring. And unfortunately, we'll have to close the panel now. But thank you so much for your time and sharing your experience and your victories. And I will now leave the mic and the floor to my comrade Thelma for the next panel. Thank you again so much for your time, all the panelists.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm Thelma, and I'm going to present the panel 3. And this particular panel is going to, hang on. Okay, this particular panel will try to connect the problems of the South and of the North, of the South coming to the North, in a sense. Okay, because we know that a lot of our Southern people, okay, they come here for, you know, to better their lives, you know, as migrant workers and all that. But here are the panelists who are going to share with us their struggles and the resistances and their experiences of how they have organized people, their own people, and people within the, you know, the various communities, to not only to fight for the rights and welfare, but also to be able to address certain issues that have emanated from their home country. And we have here 3 panelists. The first one is from Haiti, and she's going to share with us her experiences in organizing in the land of Haiti. Her name is Marie-Vita Telsi. She's a peasant woman who has been an activist in the peasant organization Tet Kole Tipaysan Haitian, known as Solidarity of Small Haitian Peasants, since 1986, and is currently a member of the National Coordinating Committee. She is a former member of the national leadership of TK, they call it, and she's also a founding member of, if I pronounce it, you know, incorrectly, please excuse me, Réseau Femmes, Radio Comité Note Haïtien, Refraca, Women's Community Radio Network. And so we give the floor to Marie-Vita Telsi. Welcome.
Bonjour, je vais traduire pour Vita, qui va s'adresser à vous dans sa langue maternelle, qu'est le créole. Alors, Vita, c'est vous-même qui a commencé le panel là, donc je suis là pour traduire pour vous. Vita, sou ka ouvri micro?
Allô?
Oui, entendez.
OK. C'est un plaisir pour moi pour participer dans le panel ça après-midi. Et non pas moi, c'est Marie-Vita Telsi, femme paysan nord-ouest, membre tête politique paysan haïtien. Moi, je fais partie coordination nationale tête politique paysan haïtien et membre commission femmes tête politique paysan haïtien.
Alors, moi, je suis Marie-Vita Telsi, une femme paysanne du nord-ouest qui fait partie de tête collée des petits paysans haïtiens, solidarité en fait des petits paysans haïtiens. Et je suis également membre du comité de coordination de Tête Collée et membre du comité de femmes de Tête Collée du Paysan haïtien. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être avec vous ce matin.
Moi, je fais partie d'un mouvement international et Via Campesina.
Je fais partie également du mouvement international Via Campesina.
Moi, remercie nous de ce que nous avons fait choix de moi pour nous capables de participer dans le panel ça après-midi. Et
je vous remercie de m'avoir choisi, de m'avoir invité à participer à ce panel cet après-midi.
Et pour nous parler des situations femmes paysannes et pour nous faire rallonge sur situation femmes ouvrières et puis pour nous capable de râler tout sur accord Montana.
Donc, je vais adresser en particulier la situation des femmes paysannes. Et je vais également en profiter pour parler d'une situation spécifique des femmes ouvrières qu'il y a actuellement. Et je ferai un clin d'œil sur l'accord de Montana, j'expliquerai plus tard.
Là, nous parlons des femmes paysans. Et femmes paysans, c'est le monde qui travaille terre, femmes qui fait élevage et femmes qui fait commerce, femmes qui fait travail, en général, travail domestique.
Alors, quand on parle des femmes paysannes, on parle d'une catégorie sociale qui travaille la terre, qui font le commerce, le jardinage et le travail domestique.
Comme ça, yo pas de travail ni la journée ni la nuit, yo fait tout travail. C'est eux-mêmes qui nous relayent potomitan et économie société. Nous relayent pont économie en tout. Pour qui ça?
Alors, ces femmes n'ont pas travaillent du matin au soir sans répit et nous, on les appelle les piliers de la société et les piliers de l'économie haïtienne.
Nous disons ces piliers et économie société parce que femmes c'est eux-mêmes qui prennent produit sorti dans monde sous tête pour descendre la ville, pour faire échange avec l'autre paysan pareil et puis pour faire échange avec l'autre madame Sarah qui vend dans l'autre marché.
Alors, nous disons que ces femmes, ce sont les piliers de l'économie haïtienne parce que ce sont elles qui prennent des produits dans les campagnes, dans les mondes pour les amener vers la ville et qui font l'échange avec d'autres revendeuses, d'autres paysannes qui revendent ces produits-là dans les grandes villes.
Et femmes ça non seulement ils fait marché local, mais ils fait marché national tout, parce que c'est eux-mêmes qui relient grande ville avec Port-au-Prince.
Bon, ils font également le marché local, mais aussi le marché national parce qu'ils relient les grandes villes à la campagne.
Comme ça, ils subissent en pile violence. Conditions voyage, conditions de transporter produits ça, c'est toujours une catastrophe. Yo marché à pied, yo marché dans la boue, la pluie mouillée, soleil boulé, yo monté sous tête camion, ensemble avec un pile bout de sac. C'est des femmes qui sont infatigables.
Alors, ces femmes vivent des conditions très difficiles et subissent beaucoup de violence. Ils doivent faire beaucoup de kilomètres à pied, souvent, pour amener les produits. Ils voyagent dans des conditions catastrophiques sur le dos des camions, parmi les sacs. Voilà.
Ouais. Des fois, dans le camion, ils ont fait accident, ils ont mouru, ils ont violé des fois, ils ont assassiné, ils bandits qu'on assassiné, ils ont perdu toute marchandise.
Et ces femmes subissent parfois, là, au cours de ces voyages, le viol et des bandits armés les assassinent et ils perdent leur commerce. On les vole.
Nous disons femmes paysans, ils subissent violence, ils subissent discrimination sociale, ils subissent tout discrimination économique dans le pays.
Ces femmes subissent non seulement de la violence, mais de la discrimination sociale et discrimination économique au pays.
Comme ça, yo prend crédit pour occuper ti moun yo fait toute qualité commerce pour yo ouais si yo capable vivre avec famille là.
En fait, ils vont faire des prêts à des taux usuraires et pour pouvoir faire ces commerces et s'occuper de leur famille.
Là, nous dit femmes ça yo même yo subit discrimination sociale. Nous dit femmes ça yo c'est yo pas qu'on lit, yo pas qu'on écrit. Mais yo fait business là et on dit yo fait li oral parce que yo pas gen ken technique qui pour permettre yo pas gen ken l'autre moyen qui pour permettre yo calculer, c'est à moyen tête yo calculer ça yo pas qu'on li, yo pas qu'on écrit.
Alors, en parlant de discrimination sociale, c'est que ces femmes ne savent ni lire ni écrire et souvent, et ils sont en train de faire ce commerce en utilisant uniquement leur intelligence pour pouvoir faire les décomptes et s'occuper de tout.
Et ces femmes paysannes qui ont même produit agronomes, ingénieurs, docteurs, toutes sortes et professionnels qui gagnent dans la société, et bien ces femmes paysannes qui travaillent dans le commerce, dans le trafic, madame Sarah, qui vous permettent d'occuper petit ça demain, même si vous pas dans l'école, et qui vous fait arriver avec produit l'autre métier avec l'autre et monde dans la société.
Leur contribution aussi va de manière plus générale à la société, car leur commerce permet de financer les études de leurs enfants qui vont devenir par la suite des agronomes, des ingénieurs, des médecins, etc.
Malgré tout ça, nous dit, dans 10 dernières années, nous dit que les femmes paysannes subissent des crises politiques et économiques, la vie chère, et puis insécurité générale qui a tracassé le pays et qui a retombé général sur les femmes paysannes.
Je dois dire que dans ces dernières années, les femmes paysannes ont vécu la crise politique et économique très durement, donc y compris le coût élevé de la vie et l'insécurité.
Dans tout pays, il y a une insécurité, bandits occupent tout espace dans tout pays. Ils ont établi base et ils ont tué femmes, ils ont tué timoun, ils ont tué garçons en général et ils ont fait répression et pression sur femmes et côté femmes viennent exercer ça la pérez journée jeudi ils ont pas marcher parce que insécurité a trop plus.
Les bandits armés occupent presque tous les espaces du pays. Ils font des pressions sur les femmes et ils tuent également les hommes. Et les femmes vivent dans la peur de circuler et de débarquer normalement à leurs occupations.
C'est ça qui fait. Et sorti 2019 pour arriver 2022 là, bon marchand paysans yo pas capable de traverser sortir dans l'autre coin pour arriver dans la capitale là, pour sortir dans l'autre coin tout pour arriver dans la grande ville à cause d'insécurité bandit dans tout point.
Ce qui a comme conséquence que les femmes de 2019 à 2022, que les femmes ne peuvent pas circuler normalement à travers le pays et faire le commerce qui est leur moyen de survie.
Et l'on parle des femmes paysannes, tout n'a pas allongé pour nous garder, pour nous voir situation femmes ouvrières. Moi, je prends la situation femmes ouvrières accompagner femmes paysannes parce que femmes paysannes, c'est eux-mêmes qui quittent les provinces, la caillou à cause du chômage, pas de travail, ils descendent dans la grande ville pour aller chercher travail.
En fait, je fais une extension pour parler des femmes ouvrières parce que ces femmes, les ouvrières, ce sont généralement des femmes paysannes qui, n'ayant pas ne trouvant pas de travail au niveau de leur zone, doivent aller vers les grandes villes justement et aller chercher du travail et qui se retrouvent dans les manufactures.
Ouvrières, parfois, ils travaillent la caille madame, Léo pas qu'à travailler encore, yo mène démarche pour yo al travail dans factory côté un patron pour yo sous responsabilité un patron, eh bien en pile fois yo levé à 6h du matin pour yo al travail et puis yo retourné à 6h du soir.
En fait, ces femmes arrivées dans les grandes villes commencent parfois à travailler comme domestiques chez certaines familles, mais très vite, elles vont faire des démarches pour aller rejoindre les manufactures. Ces femmes subissent toutes sortes de violences de la part des patrons et elles commencent à travailler très tôt, dès 6h le matin jusqu'à 6h le soir.
Et là, fini, là, retourner la caillou, yo gen pour continuer le travail domestique là, parce que c'est eux-mêmes, comme femmes, et la société a dit, c'est femmes, comme c'est femmes, c'est eux pour faire tout l'autre travail domestique.
Et une fois arrivées à la maison, elles vont s'occuper des travaux domestiques, étant donné que la société a tendance à prétendre que ce sont des travaux féminins et que c'est elles, les femmes, qui doivent s'occuper de ces tâches.
Comme ça, au travail, pour un petit casse-pomme. On dit dans le pays d'Haïti, je dis, malgré cher la vie, ils payent 500 gouttes par jour. Et 500 gouttes, ça pas utile en rien.
Ces femmes travaillent pour un salaire de misère. On va dire que maintenant, le salaire minimum est de 500 gouttes, qui correspond à environ 3-4 dollars américains par jour. Et ce salaire de misère ne leur permet pas de survivre.
Et c'est ça fait, mesdames et sœurs, comme ouvrières, ils ont formé des syndicats pour permettre de joindre secours population, pour joindre solidarité avec le reste de la population, pour permettre de porter revendications au côté de l'État pour améliorer les conditions salaires.
Et c'est pourquoi ces femmes s'organisent dans des syndicats et commencent à mobiliser la société d'une manière générale à la recherche de solidarité pour apporter leurs revendications face à l'État réactionnaire.
En pile fois, mesdames, les sorti dans facteur, les fin payer yo pas joindre pour yo aller occuper Carré parce que yo te gitan fin doué. Et yo doit plus que ça yo recevoir. Et ça vient mettre dans situation plus malheureuse que Jean Oteye.
Alors, ces femmes, quand ils reçoivent ce salaire de misère, ils avaient déjà des dettes qui surpassent même ce qu'elles reçoivent et ce qui empire leur situation.
C'est peut-être ça. Il est au côté revendication, au bon côté de l'État, surtout année ça, et ils joignent l'État répondre aux revendications avec, on dit la police répond aux revendications avec coup de bâton et gaz lacrymogène, et ils tirent sur eux, ils gen femme enceinte qui prend balle, qui prend gaz, qui a couché sous cabane de l'hôpital. Comme récompense, c'est ça qu'ils joignent.
Alors, quand elles se mobilisent et prennent les rues, la réponse de l'État et de la police, plus précisément, c'est de leur donner des gaz lacrymogènes, des coups de matraque et de tirer de vraies balles. Il y a certaines femmes enceintes qui ont été atteintes de projectiles et qui se retrouvent à l'hôpital.
Ouvriers ont revendiqué 1500 gouttes de salaire par jour. Et l'État haïtien mettait 125 gouttes sur 1500 gouttes demandées et l'État haïtien promet 125 gouttes. Ça t'a fait environ 625 gouttes par rapport à 1500 gouttes demandées.
Alors, justement, le salaire que réclament les ouvriers et les ouvrières n'est pas assez énorme. Ils demandent maintenant 1500 gourdes, qui est l'équivalent d'environ 14 dollars américains par jour. Et le gouvernement a répondu, l'État haïtien a répondu en ajoutant 185, en tout cas, en passant le salaire à 685 gourdes, qui est l'équivalent d'environ, je sais pas, environ 6 dollars américains par jour. C'est ce qu'on leur offre.
Et cette situation, conditions de vie et ouvrières, et pas permettre et retenir en caille et qui est normal, qui est confort, et yo toujours et rester dans un petit bout de chambre, côté 10 moun dans bout de chambre, qui pas capable d'assurer condition la vie au monde. Et c'est ça que fait en pile fois, il est toujours malade. Il est toujours atteint des maladies infectieuses.
Les conditions de vie des ouvrières est tellement minable, exécrable, vu que le salaire ne leur permet pas de bien se loger, elles se ramassent dans des petites pièces réduites à 6-7 dans une pièce, donc ce qui cause qu'elles se retrouvent à être souvent malades et attrapent des maladies infectieuses.
Je ne dis et crise économique et politique pays, li atteint ouvriers, li atteint femmes paysans, li atteint très fortement femmes ouvriers parce que Femmes caille pour louer en chambre caille je ne dis la coûter à 45 à 50 000 gouttes et on l'argent que vous pas gagné.
La crise économique frappe, politique économique frappe très durement les femmes paysannes, les femmes ouvrières et bon, la société d'une manière générale. Mais c'est plus exacerbé pour les ouvrières vu que le salaire qu'elles font ne leur permet pas de payer le loyer qui est très dispendieux.
Il y a l'autre élément encore, son droit que ouvriers gagnent et paysans gagnent pour revendiquer parce que la société a bas au droit ça. Déclaration universelle droit moun bas au droit ça. Et que les revendiquer, eh bien, ils ne pas reconnaître valeur en tant que moun dans la société.
C'est un droit que les ouvrières et les paysannes ont de faire passer leurs revendications et de manifester et les différentes chartes du pays, le charte de droit universel des êtres humains, tout ça leur confère ce droit-là. Mais malheureusement, quand ils essayent d'appliquer ces droits, on ne les reconnaît pas et on ne les reconnaît pas en tant qu'être humain dans la société.
Et c'est pour ça qu'il y a un pile dans ouvriers qui révoquent et patrons révoquent parce qu'ils n'ont pas de droit à ça pour manifester.
Et en guise de représailles, les patrons vont révoquer les ouvriers qui participent aux manifestations parce qu'on ne leur reconnaît pas ce droit-là.
Et pour nous avancer et toujours, nous sommes capables de dire différentes crises qui traversent ces pays, crise économique, crise politique qui traversent ces pays depuis 11 l'année qui viennent empirer et situation politique et économique pays qui vient établir un climat insécurité généralisée dans le pays et il y a diverses organisations qui mettaient ensemble parmi organisations où joignent tête politique paysan haïtien et MPP, MPNKP et où joignent CROSS l'ensemble organisations paysans ils fait une plateforme et ces plateformes ça qui pral réfléchir ensemble avec tout l'autre acteur dans la société qui conscient que la société a pas gouverné, la société a vient tomber dans une situation en dégrabat, eh bien, il dit faut qu'il réfléchisse pour eux si vous capable couper fâcher avec système pesé sous ça qui fini avec malheureux, qui fini avec société il former un corps pour être capable de réfléchir sur qui mode alternative ou bien qui mode réponse pour voter dans la société.
Bon, je vais essayer de ramasser tout ça. La crise qui détruit le pays depuis les 11 dernières années qui crée un climat intense d'insécurité amène différentes organisations paysannes, elle a cité quelques-unes, de grandes organisations paysannes au niveau national, à se rassembler dans une plateforme afin de réfléchir avec d'autres personnes différentes, d'autres secteurs de la société sur les autres acteurs de la société pour voir comment rompre avec le système d'exploitation qui sévit au pays et de trouver des alternatives.
Et en plus fois, elle a toujours dit...
Elle va finir bientôt, je pense que c'est presque la fin.
Haïtien pas gain alternative et même si il a fait revendication mais il pas gain alternative fois ça en haïtien il dit faut que fait un bagay sorti pour permettre à ce que nous arriver dans couper fâché avec mode système ça c'est peut-être ça yo accouché à Montana, et à Montana qui accouché le 30 août 2021, et qui arrivait à un niveau côté avant 7 février, 30 janvier, yo éli 2 membres, et yon président, yon premier ministre, pour permettre yo assurer transition rupture que vous parlé.
OK. Et justement, souvent, on parle d'Haïti comme si c'était un pays avec un certain immobilisme, mais ce n'est pas vrai. Les Haïtiens sont en train de se concerter, de réfléchir, et c'est dans ce cadre qu'on est, après des discussions, qu'on est arrivé à avoir ce qu'on appelle l'accord de Montana. Je vais mettre dans le chat les liens pour voir ça, et qui a été fait le 30 août 2021. Cet accord vise à chercher une solution haïtienne à la crise et en même temps a pour objectif d'arriver à une transition de rupture par rapport à mode de gouvernance, gabegie administrative, corruption, etc.
Pour moi, cette classe, comme temps limité, et nous avons vraiment cette classe, mais même si il y a plus toujours, et c'est ça, nous sommes capables de dire, sous situation crise paysan qui passait par ouvriers et qui arrivait là, et en une alternative qui c'est accord Montana, je ne veux dire, et que nous avons une série de mobilisations pour permettre à ce que nous mobiliser la population pour être capable de comprendre l'accord. Merci.
Bon. Alors, pour faire un résumé de tout ce que je viens de dire, j'ai parlé de la crise qui frappe les paysannes, les ouvrières, et qui débouche maintenant sur cette solution haïtienne qui est l'accord de Montana. On est en train maintenant de travailler sur un ensemble de mobilisations pour sensibiliser le reste de la population sur ce que c'est cet accord et la nécessité de supporter cette alternative.
Merci
voilà,
beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marie Vita, for giving us a real insight into what is happening with women in Haiti and the basic needs and struggles of these women, to be able to fight for their rights, and what kind of, despite all the resistances, they move on. They're trying hard to fight for their rights in the country that has really, the country that has, the governance has not really protected them as well. And we are with you in your struggle. And thank you very much. As we move on to our next speaker.
May I just say what you just said to Vita, because she doesn't understand. Alors, Vita, c'est que Thelma vient de dire que les remercier de ce que vous présentez la situation femme haïtienne et que l'État n'a pas accompagné et que nous comprenons qu'il y a une crise difficile et qu'il y a en solidarité avec vous. Alors, on fait un beau résumé, ça le dire.
OK, merci. Merci. Et nous souhaitons solidarité à Kembe pour permettre à ce que les femmes soient capables de connaître, ce n'est pas eux-mêmes seules, les femmes haïtiennes, ce n'est pas eux-mêmes seules qui sont dans la situation.
And she hoped that solidarity will last so that the Haitian women knows that they're not alone, and then that should be entire solidarity, if I could say that.
Definitely. Solidarity with the Haitian women.
Merci.
Okay, so our next presenter is Evelyn Mondonedo, and Evelyn has been in the forefront of struggle for migrant women's rights. Could we request people to close their mics, please? Okay, so Evelyn has been with the women's organization, Migrant Women Organization, PNAI, for more than 25 years, and she has been by profession, she is a nurse, but has been a volunteer and a woman advocate and activist for the past 30 years or so. And not only that, her children, her own children, are also activists in their own rights for peace, justice, and in the Philippines. So Evelyn, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on the panel about Pinay. I'll do my best to represent Pinay, and I hope I will do a good job. I mean, I will do a clear message about Pinay. Pinay is a Filipino word used to describe a Filipino woman living outside of the Philippines. Usually, when Filipinos meet Filipino women outside their country, they will ask them if they are Pinay. Pinay ka ba? Are you Pinay? And Pinay is an organization for Filipino migrants and immigrant women that was founded in 1991 in response to the need to empower Filipino women living in Quebec. Since its conception, Pinay has played a role in the fight for the rights and welfare of Filipino migrants and immigrants, especially Filipino domestic workers and their families living and working in Quebec. Pinay also works tirelessly to expose the dire conditions of the Philippine society and the stalled development imposed on its people by imperialist globalization and the US military intervention in the country. Pinay believes that the condition that puts millions of Filipinos seeking work abroad is linked to the injustices Filipinos face in Canada. In Montreal, we have joined a coalition to campaign for an increase in the minimum wage, a living wage for workers, knowing that this will certainly help in improving the precarity of low-skilled temporary workers. In addition, we also demand, along with other migrant groups, regularization of non-status migrants and an immediate permanent residence for temporary foreign workers already in Canada, since they are needed by Quebec and the Canadian government. They deserve to live and work with dignity and respect without fear of deportation. For us in Pinay, we has always been more than just helping the women and their issues with employers, but also in helping them to understand their situation as migrant workers, and that they are not facing individual cases, but a more systemic form of exploitation and oppression by the Philippine government as well as the Canadian government. This helps to empower them in their own understanding of the many challenges they face, and at the same time, help in advancing the work in Pinay for the future. The use of labor brokers and recruitment agencies has led to the proliferation of operators who use the opportunity for making a fast buck. Brokers are largely unregulated, and temporary foreign workers have paid exorbitant fees for placement with no receipts. Even if in their work contract it states candidate employees are not to be charged with their transportation to come to Canada to work, nor pay the third-party expenses. That this is the responsibility of the employers to pay the transportation and third-party expenses. This agency, immigration consultant, immigration lawyers, notaries, capitalizes workers' desperation. They facilitate the entry of the worker legally into Canada by matching an employer to whom they get into an agreement. In this process, recruitment agencies are in collaboration with the employers and are therefore in conflict of interest. At the end of their first contract, agencies, consultants, lawyers, notaries, and employers give false hope to their caregivers that they will be renewing their contract and the LMIA. In the end, many caregivers are in a panic when they find out that the process of renewing has not been started. Their immigration status is expiring, and the employer made a condition to renew the contract only if the employee pays the expenses for the processing of the immigration documents, which is the LMIA necessary for the renewal of their work permit. Some caregivers refuse to accept the condition, so they end up being a non-status workers and in limbo. They lost their remaining strength they had, the strength to find a decent job to support their family in the Philippines and their daily sustenance, the strength to maintain their physical and mental health, and the right to seek justice. All migrant women workers from all over the world and supporters in the host country should stick together and march with linked arms, making our voices loud enough to be heard by politicians. Meanwhile, Canada must compete with other countries to draw in high-skilled and professional workers. It has created the Canadian Experience class to hold on to foreign students who have studied in Canada and skilled workers who came as temporary foreign workers and acquired Canadian experience. They are offered immigrant status. The provinces can also sponsor temporary foreign workers as immigrants under the provincial nominee program. But this remains the piecemeal measures and does not serve the clear trend and does not reverse the clear trend to a two-tiered immigration system in Canada. This system was also perpetrated by the Philippine government in their own labor export policy that also systematized the export of their Filipino citizens as migrant workers in over 160 countries around the world. This was and still is an economic policy encouraged by international bodies for the governments to gain remittances from migrant workers as a way to keep the neo-colonial economy afloat rather than finding more sustainable and permanent solution for the development of the said countries. Canada is aggressive in recruiting nannies from the Philippines. There are hundreds of special schools training Filipinos to work as live-in or live-out caregivers in Canadian homes. It is estimated that there are 800 of these special schools across the Philippines. Would-be nannies who attend the special schools in the Philippines, some legitimate, some dubious, learn how Canadians like their shirts ironed and their meat cooked. They're told that if they complete 24 months of work within a 3-year period, they qualify for permanent resident status. For many, their hope is to bring the children they had to leave behind for many years to Canada. We have observed that the time a Filipino nanny is separated from their family can range from 3 years up to 15 years. Many have reported to us that they have first worked either in Hong Kong, Singapore, or the Middle East, or sometimes all three prior to entering the live-in caregiver or caregiver program in Canada. When the family reunites, it is a long and hard process of adjustment for all. Many of the children of caregiver workers end up dropping out of school and become the new pool of cheap labor working in factories, hospitals, restaurants, and other industries of Canada. However, many feel that this is their only chance to have a better life for themselves and their children. The cuts in the live-in caregiver workers have no choice but to live with their employer, which no other workers is required by law. This opens the door to widespread abuse, such as stretching the 40 hours work week by demanding the already nanny to do more hours here, more chores there. Our organization, PNAI, in Montreal has recorded several cases of women who dare complain about their situation. They report everything from long hours to verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. This is why we in PNAI call live-in caregiver, the live-in caregiver program indentured slave. In the early years of the program, the women were not even paid minimum wage, as they were not included in the regular labor standard as all workers in Quebec. We needed to fight for the minimum wage for these migrant workers, and in solidarity with other individuals and groups, it was won. They were included in the regular labor standard of a 40-hour work week, 8-hour days, and overtime pay if necessary. But just like many laws and policies, it wasn't always respected by employers. So again, women workers under the program needed to continue and will continue to have to fight for their basic rights that many Canadians may take for granted. In the recent labor standard reform, inclusion of domestic workers for CSST coverage has been approved. It's not satisfactory, but at least it's a start for the government to recognize that these workers are visible workers and deserve the same rights and recognition as any Quebec workers. Further struggles to improve this inclusion is necessary because of the condition attached to the regulation stating that their inclusion depends on the discretion of their employer. The CSST struggle is an important one, which shows the sexist and racist nature of the caregiver program. Employers in several sectors have found that they cannot attract the reliable workforce unless workers are tied to their jobs and cannot change easily. For example, the live-in caregivers, the only way to keep workers in the current condition is to make the live-in mandatory, as with the live-in caregiver program. Dirty, difficult, and dangerous jobs are reserved for temporary foreign workers. It all depends on what a woman is willing to do for her people at the end of 36 months. But most of them stay silent for fear of being deported. Even the Quebec government and the Council for the Status of Women recognizes that there are many problems, such as none is willing to compromise rather than ask for outside help. Caring for children and the elderly are not the only job specification for the caregivers must do. There is also cleaning, laundry, gardening, pool maintenance, lifeguard, car wash, chauffeur, pet caring, and the maintenance, and the occasional masseuse for the man of the house. Many of these women have college degree of some sort. This is why it is no it's not unusual that these women have professional skills and college degree. They wonder, to us, we hear that nannies do some nursing care jobs.
If you can kind of summarize, Evelyn, yeah.
Yeah, they have been exploited, being paid minimum wage for this kind of jobs, like nursing care for elderly, the handicap, and also for the children. So this program has to go, and they should be, if the government has to still need these workers here in Canada, they should be given permanent resident status here, who are already here in Canada. And that's our demands right now. Regularization of undocumented workers and permanent resident status now for temporary workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for, giving us a very good sum up of all the struggles and resistances of the group of migrant women. And we hope, and we are in solidarity with you, that you will go on for another many years, as you have had. Anyway, the next speaker that we have is Juvaria Yasser, and Juvaria is from the Southeast Asian Women's Community Center. Am I right? And she is the directress of the Centre Communautaire des Femmes d'Asia du Sud. She has been working with women, since 2006, and has discovered and developed her passion for community, love, sisterhood, and feminism. So I give you, Juvaria.
Thank you so much, Thelma. Thank you. I'm very honored to be invited in this forum to talk about our community's women's struggles and resistances. I would like to start by introducing the SAC, South Asian Women's Community Center, to those who have not heard about us. SAC was founded in 1981 by a group of South Asian women who recognized that many South Asian women in Montreal were struggling to adjust to life after immigration. Our mission and ultimate goal has always been the empowerment of women. We provide frontline services to our service users. At the center, we speak 10 languages, including French and English, to better serve our community. For those who would like to know, the South Asian countries are India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan. Because Afghanistan and Iran have similar languages and culture, we are giving services to people from these countries also. This does not mean that our services are restricted to people from South Asian origins only, but just that over 40 years of our work with the South Asian communities has helped us to support our service users, respecting their culture and their needs. It would not be very easy to describe the profile of the center users, as South Asia is a huge region where each country has its own subcultures. To make matters more complicated, the urban centers of these countries are changing fast, and that has an impact on the women of big cities, whereas many of the rural areas in these countries are still far away from catching up with the modern world. The South Asian countries are generally patriarchal societies. Literacy rate is lower in women than men. And because of per capita income of the South Asian country is low, majority of women suffer the consequences of severe poverty. According to the census of 2016, there are 41,410 South Asian women living in Montreal. Our service users and program participants come from all over Montreal to us for services, advice, counseling, to find resources and support. Many of these do not speak French or English and have not had a lot of formal education, and are lost in their families to find resources and independence because it is expected that they will sacrifice their own development in order to let the family achieve their goals first, while they take the backseat and look after the home and the family. The major issues that we see our women facing are similar to the struggles of many, many other women: oppression, domestic violence, lack of support for personal growth and development, and lack of resources to improve the situation. When our women immigrate to Canada, they lose the support system that they rely on when they're living in their own countries. Because traditionally, many families live 3 or 4 generations, live in the same house. Women get help and some support from each other. As a result, they cannot, when they come here, what happens is that men and children, they get involved in jobs, schools, and move on in their lives. And women are left behind to look after the home and family. They cannot learn the language, they cannot find work, and they do not know sometimes even to use public transport. As a result, many women do not know where to go when they are in problem. They have to rely heavily on their husbands and their children for simple things such as going to a doctor, talk what's wrong. They don't know their rights. Our work at the center involves not only giving individual support to women when they come to us for help, but also to give them knowledge and tools to become independent. We are aware that years of living in a colonized patriarchal society has left deep marks on the way people think or accept practices that are discriminating. At the center, we organize workshops on gender equality and violence against women. During these sessions, we often talk about issues as women's subordination within the family or challenge the existing man-woman relationship framework. We have learned that these efforts take time and continuity. What we hear from our participants is that even if they have accepted their fate, they wish for a better future for their girl children. This sentence, when it comes from our participants, is a cue for us to question how the daughter's life will change if she's learning, all she's learning is what she's seeing. In recent times, the issues that have impacted the lives of South Asian women in Montreal include racism, Islamophobia, the use of phrases such as honor killings or barbaric practices by media and government, and language laws such as Bill 96. We all know and we all have seen what is happening as a result of all these. Our strategy of resistance is twofold at the center: educating our women and collaborating with our partner organizations to raise our voice. At the center, we not only give support and service to individuals, but we also organize workshops, programs, and information sessions for women to educate and inform them about their rights. We work with other like-minded groups to make our issues visible and to fight for our rights. We involve in mobilization actions, campaigns of letter writing, protests, marches, and rallies. I will end by reflecting on the lessons that we have learned as feminist activists, that bringing change starts by awareness, but needs continuous work, persistence, solidarity, and inclusion. I thank women of our diverse origins for giving me the opportunity to talk about SOC, and to all of you for your patience hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jovaria. You have really kind of summarized, what all these panelists have been saying, in terms of arousing, organizing, and mobilizing women to change their situation. And I don't know if we have time for, it's 2:00. I just want to check in with the organizers there, if we can continue on receiving some questions, because I know that we don't have that much time for the next, the next speaker.
Yeah, we don't have any questions in chat, so I suggest that we move on to the next panel, as we have gone over our time widely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to all the panelists, and the great work that activists have been doing. Thank you.
Enfin, notre dernier panel, et non le moindre, porte sur construire des solidarités, faire avancer les luttes, construire des solidarités pour le changement. Alors, je cède la parole à Dolores, qui est membre de FDO. À toi, Dolores.
Thank you, Marie-Claude, Leila, and everybody for being here. I realize we're going way over time. And right now, our final speaker, keynote speaker, we're very excited to have her, a young woman, Navkiran Nath, from Punjab in India, is not with us. We're a little worried because she was traveling from India to USA and she should have reached, but she hasn't. So we're checking in with friends in India. But in the meantime, instead of hearing from her directly, what we're going to do is share a few little clips where you get to hear her, but also what she was going to share with you, which is this amazing movement that mobilized farmers and farm workers and landless peasants from across India. And they went on strike for more than a year. And finally, the Indian government had to cave in. And it was against economic liberalization, which would impoverish farmers who are already impoverished. Many commit suicide. It was going to open up grain markets to corporate globalization. And it's a heroic strike because it also connected things like women's rights against the government of India, which has been jailing human rights defenders, and there are hundreds of political prisoners. So it brought everything together in a fearless way, and it's been inspiring. And so we wanted to end on this note of inspiration that, when we work collectively together, we are able to make change. Sometimes we don't see it immediately, but it is there. So to cut to the quick, I'm just going to quickly begin with something where we will hear Navkiran Nath herself. Okay. And this clip was filmed on International Women's Day last year when several 100,000 farmers came to the border and women. Okay.
I'm professionally trained as a dentist. Here I'm present as an activist from last 3 months. From 26th onwards, 26th November onwards, I'm based in Tikri Morcha. So we are finding our own ways how we can strengthen this movement. So we collectively started Trolley Times, a newsletter which started from the protest site. And I'm the editorial team member of Trolley Times. And also we are running a library, Shahid Bhagat Singh Library at Tikri border. We also started screening films on the name of Trolley Talkies in Tikri only. So we as young individuals, we are also finding our own ways how we can support this movement. The women who are present on the morcha, they are asserting themselves again and again that they are the primary protesters. We are not as a wife or as a sister or like someone who is related to the male farmers. They are asserting themselves as the primary protesters. It's our own fight. That's why they are participating in huge numbers. मैं राजपुरा बहन गांव से हूँ, जींद जिला से.
Then it moves into Punjabi. So I'm just going to go to another clip. As Navkiran said, and as you just heard from Javaria, patriarchy is alive and well everywhere. The forms vary, but among many of these families, patriarchy is very, very entrenched. And so it has been, also a very strong statement by the women. And some of the older farm leaders have said, without the participation of women, you cannot have a people struggle. So apart from organizing, they also had to ensure things about alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and so on. And just going back a little bit about this amazing young woman, Navkiran, because her story is also a story of inspiration for us and next generation. So she trained as a dentist and worked as a dentist, worked in a private hospital, and was totally disgusted at the way, as a young dentist, she was supposed to ask people to take expensive procedures. And finally she quit, totally disgusted with the private medical system. She went back, she studied filmmaking, and then this farmers' protest emerged. And as a filmmaker and as a person with media, she started, as you just heard, this newspaper, the Trolley Times. And this is her mother, and she comes from a family also that has been very involved in struggles and have been sent to jail repeatedly. Now I'm just going to go to this clip over here. Can you see that I've shifted the screen or not? Can somebody tell me?
Yeah.
You can see it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a short video from, again, Women's Day last year. I fast forwarded it a bit. It's got subtitles in English.
ਆਪਣੇ ਕੰਮ ਧੰਦੇ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਸੜਕ ਤਾਂ ਰੋਲਣ ਲਈ ਮਜਬੂਰ ਹੋ ਗਈਆਂ, ਪਰ ਕਿ ਹੁਣੇ ਰੱਦ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਰਹਿਣਗੇ, ਕਰਾ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਜਾਵਾਂਗੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਚੱਕ ਅਸੀਂ ਚੈਨ ਨਾਲ ਘਰੇ ਸੌ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇਗੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਚਿਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਇਹ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਰੱਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦਾਗਾ।
ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੇ ਕੋਨੇ ਤੋਂ ਆਈਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਜਜ਼ਾਰੂ ਮਾਵਾਂ ਭੈਣਾਂ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਆਉਣ ਨੂੰ ਸਲਾਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਕਾਰਪੋਰੇਟ
And just very quickly to conclude, a few stanzas from the localized version of Bella Ciao, which was done for the farmers' strike.
असा निकलिया छड़ सारी फिक्रा गांदे आए जालिम वापस जाओ 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 मिट्टी दे कण कण विचों है आंदी ऐही गूंज है जालिम वापस जाओ
पहले भी कभी रोटियां बनाई थी ऐसे
ना नहीं ये तो मोदी सरकार ने बनवानी सिखा दी है
So I'll just stop it there. If you know, people want links, we can share it. But you know, hearing this morning from Haiti, from farmers and peasants there, or people who have had to migrate because they can no longer sustain themselves on their lands, there's this universal struggle, and as they say, no farmers, no food. And what the farmers movement in India has demonstrated, the crucial role of women, as Navsharan and others were saying, not just as sisters or mothers or wives who wait at home, but as participants who see this as really, really important. So it's, I mean, it always leaves me speechless and a bit emotional. We hope Navkiran is fine. And so I know we're dreadfully out of time, so I'm just going to stop here. Thank you.
Marie-Claude, you're mute.
J'ai ouvert, n'est-ce pas?
Yes.
OK. Wow, quelle belle conclusion. C'est vraiment comme un fil conducteur, un fil blanc qui a commencé du premier panel jusqu'au dernier. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Alors, au nom de notre organisme Femmes d'origine diverse, nous vous remercions de tout cœur pour avoir répondu nombreux à notre invitation pour réfléchir sur les enjeux qui nous concernent tous en tant qu'humaines, en tant que femmes, en tant qu'immigrantes. Nous sommes d'accord que l'après-pandémie ne sera jamais pareille à l'avant-pandémie. En effet, la pandémie a mis en lumière les inégalités existantes plus clairement qu'avant. Profitons, mes chers amis, profitons de ces moments pour mener un changement solide. J'aimerais citer Marlene Lopez qui nous a dit cet après-midi, cultiver et investir dans la solidarité. Je passe la parole à Leila.
So it is up to us to act in order to bring about lasting change. We have to answer 3 questions: what to do in the near future, how to do it, and who should do it. Let's start by taking the streets to demand this change next Saturday at 2 o'clock, Metro Park. I will pass the mic to Dolores for the chant of Azadi, and if there are any other announces, she can take care of it. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Leila. So I think we're just a hardy bunch who are left here, and you are probably very familiar with this slogan already, so not very much tutoring. Just very quick background for those who might not know, this was a chant that was put together by women in Pakistan protesting against martial law and the laws that targeted women specifically. And then it was brought to India and it's come here, and wherever it goes, we add things that are pertinent and relevant to this moment, but the basic notion of freedom, right? That we are struggling for. So the idea is that I would say the leading line, and then everybody, unmute your mic and we'll all shout Azadi. I'm going to call it out in English, but it's here in French. So, it's, just feel comfortable, and hopefully everybody will, it's very comprehensive. Okay, so let's begin. From patriarchy,
Azadi.
from all hierarchy,
Azadi.
from endless violence,
Azadi.
from helpless silence,
Azadi.
for walking freely,
Azadi.
for talking freely,
Azadi.
for praying freely,
Azadi.
for protesting freely,
Azadi.
from fascism,
Azadi.
from colonialism,
Azadi.
from imperialism,
Azadi.
from sexism,
Azadi.
from racism,
Azadi.
from climate disaster,
Azadi.
for dancing madly,
Azadi.
for singing loudly,
Azadi.
for self-expression,
Azadi.
for celebration.
Azadi.
Come say it softly.
Azadi.
Now say it loudly.
Azadi.
On streets we shout.
Azadi.
On homes we shout. It is our right.
Azadi.
Try to fight.
Azadi.
We'll snatch and take it.
Azadi.
To wait and watch it.
Azadi.
For one and all.
Azadi.
Our clarion call.
Azadi.
Thank you so much, everyone. There's one announcement that I was asked to make by friends, some of whom were here earlier but had to leave this evening. And I know everyone's probably zoomed out, but some young, it's not coming up here, some young activists have organized this event to talk about COVID from the grassroots level in South Asia, the impact on local communities. So there's a speaker from Sri Lanka, another from Pakistan, another from India, and I'll put the link in chat, COVID in South Asia. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Are there going to be shots?